we're going now through. Do we need to click on anything?
We're now live on YouTube, just to let you know.
Right. And I just need to click continue there and continue there. So that's fine. Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the virtual meeting of the Audit Committee. I am Councillor Grant Nerden and will be chairing the meeting. Before we start, I'd like to draw your attention to a few protocols that are applicable to virtual meetings. Leah will be hosting the meeting and all members are requested to have their microphone on mute unless they are speaking. If you wish to speak by asking a question or making a comment, please will you raise your hand or indicate through the chat box. If there are persons present that are not members or substitutes of the committee and wish to ask a question, please can you message the host with your question and we will endeavour to get your question answered. There's a very lengthy agenda with a lot of information to go through, so there will be the opportunity for a brief comfort break. So to start the meeting, can we have a roll call? And at the same time, an indication of whether you have an interest to declare. Thank you, James.
Chairman. Mr. Crotch, can you confirm that?
Present, good morning. Present, no declaration, and just my apologies, I do need to leave as Chairman's aware at about 11:05.
Okay. Councillor Holland.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Councillor Nerden.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Vincent.
Present, and I have an other interest. My husband, Sean Vincent, is a Director of Broadland Growth Limited.
Right.
Okay. And Councillor Brennan. Sorry.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Right.
Thank you.
So now we have apologies for absence.
Yes, we have, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Bullman and his substitute is Councillor Brennan.
Thank you. Next item is the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of March. And this is for accuracy, firstly. If we go through those page by page, let's get to that. Page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13. Can I now sign this as a true record? I know I won't be signing it virtually, but yeah, you're happy with that. Super. Next item, of course, is to look at the matters arising. And are there matters arising? I see Sue has her hand up. Yes, Sue, would you like to go ahead?
Yes. Could I just raise the risk management training item? Because I appreciate we're now doing everything virtually, but is there any way that that could be done by Zoom or potentially by in some sort of online training resource? I think the same applies to cyber crime training. I do think what I'm concerned about really is we've had quite a change of working practice, and it does seem to me that there are potentially issues related to people working from home, and that might be cybercrime related, or it might be risk according to security of documents or whatever. I just felt that perhaps there should be some way of bringing that training forward if possible. Thank you.
Right. Who is in the position to do a response to that? Would that be, I would have thought Rodney would be able to answer that if you can come in, Rodney.
I'll say there is no reason why we can't do training online through Zoom, and indeed we are actually running training at the moment on other aspects. We're doing some management training for some of our staff, and that's all being done through Zoom. So actually we need to look at doing that as soon as possible. Obviously we've got the risk management policy, and the idea is once that's been approved, we can then roll out the training after that.
Okay, excellent, because I see that there were some comments made about the risks associated with working from home, and that's on page 143, under agenda item number 9. But of course, we can get back to that as well. Karen, I saw your hand was up as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was actually going to say a very similar point to Councillor Holland, and that was about the training. So endorse what Councillor Holland's just said, but also it was on page 8 of our minutes where it talked about the risk management training for members. And I know that was something that we raised at the last meeting. As we go through the papers, it looks like it's being offered to staff, but I can't see where it's being offered to members. So it's just a request again, please, could members have training on risk management as well?
Okay.
If we're being asked to embed it in the culture of the organisation, I think it would be appropriate for us all to be appropriately trained. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Very good point there. Sue, you wanted to come back again? Sorry, you're on.
Yeah, I just wanted to endorse that I was referring to members as well, and I think that is, I do think that's really important, particularly for people on the audit committee. I think is quite would be, more perhaps the first tranche, if you like. I don't think that would be appropriate.
Okay. Right. I don't see any more hands up for matters arising. I've got a couple of points to do with the Broadland growth briefing, and I was hoping that maybe Debbie was able to give some feedback on the session that was attended by members. Was there any feedback, positive or negative, with regards to that presentation? Rodney, do you know?
Unfortunately, I can't feedback. I'd have to take that one back with Debbie. Debbie gives her apologies today, but she's actually in another briefing with the members down the road at the moment. So actually, I'm leading on this one, and Debbie's doing that one at the moment.
Okay, excellent. Right, so if you can take that back. Then going on to the item on purchase orders. And again, this was a matters arising from last meeting. And I just want to stress there that I have continued to raise this as a concern for the committee when presenting the minutes of the audit committee meeting to full council. So it's on 2 occasions now that I've raised this issue. Firstly, in the minutes it says it's complicated for staff to learn 2 processes across 2 councils. Just want to point out that this is a 2017-18 recommendation, at which stage there was no 2 councils. It's not a South Norfolk Council issue, it is a Broadland issue, and as such must be dealt with by the staff that are making purchases on behalf of Broadland. Okay, and then second point is that I see that there are 2 new important recommendations on purchase orders in the 2019-2020 draft report on key controls, which indicate that the processes have not been implemented. So A, does this mean that the earlier recommendations of the 17-18 audit can now be signed off, or do they still stand together with the 2 new important recommendations? And B, will we be able to sign these new recommendations off within 3 months, or will they be granted extension upon extension upon extension? So that's a concern that what we still have, but I will be dealing with that again when we come to the follow-up report on recommendations. And then thirdly, have there been any cases of non-compliance by officers making purchases on behalf of Broadland? Because the key thing here is that we have 2 sets of accounts. So I'm just curious to know if there were any issues of non-compliance that have come up since the last meeting. And Rodney, if you can just come back on some of those issues.
Yeah. Firstly, I want to give the members of the committee assurance that actually we are treating this as a priority thing to address. Being honest, we have had issues in that actually COVID-19 has really disrupted the way we work, and that has made it more difficult for us to progress on this. Are you okay? I've got some feedback on my line. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes, I'm absolutely clear.
Right. Okay. So COVID-19 has obviously hampered our ability to move this forward as fast as we would like, but actually we are making progress. We have made we've sent information out to all staff, reminding them of the importance of doing purchase orders. We are actually looking at who's not raising purchase orders correctly, and we have got a 10-point plan to actually make sure we do whatever we can to make sure the systems are working as effectively as possible, that everyone who needs access to it has got access to raise purchase orders and have all been trained. So actually we are actively working on this, and I really do not want to be in this position again at our next meeting to still have to come back on saying we've still got issues. Your third point was very much about, has there been any non-compliance? At the moment, I think there are still areas where we're not raising purchase orders when we should do. However, I'm not aware of any instance where there's been a financial loss or inappropriate purchase as a result of a purchase order not being raised. So actually, financially, there's been no impact. It's the case we need to just make sure we do follow the procedures.
Right, thank you, Roddy. I do see Faye shaking her head, but we will deal with that.
Just to confirm,
again.
yeah, that's our understanding as well. Following our review, I think when we look at the 1920 key controls report, this issue is raised again. However, I think we need to be a bit smart about the fact that we've still got one outstanding. The second one relates to something slightly different, so I'd be in mind to keep that. But I think keeping the older recommendation just kind of shows the timeline and shows us, you know, how long it's taken us to get a handle on this. And I think it would be strange to close that down if we leave that open until we're satisfied that actually that is now resolved. But yeah, certainly echoing Rodney's point, so we haven't found any instances of financial loss due to non-compliance. It is just best practice for this to be in place.
Okay, excellent. Good. As I say, we will come back to that issue again. Then this is another item 35 on the matters arising. Well, it's actually paragraph 35 of the report. The annual report of the Audit Committee, and I was supposed to present that at full council, but I didn't because I hadn't received the amended version of the annual report. So if that can please be sent to me so that we can check that and then present it at next full council meeting. Faye, I think there were a couple of things that
was that my report, Grant? Sorry, I can't remember. It feels like a lifetime ago now.
I know. Yeah, but there were a couple of things that we raised. It says they're subject to a few minor typographical changes.
As is my style, to sneak in a few typos to grab your attention. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. So if we can have the final version so that I can present that to the, and then of course there were some very nice, very good points that we picked up from doing the presentation to full council of the annual report, which we're trying to promote the audit committee and the work of the audit committee, which we did from the audit committee self-assessment form. So, right. The other thing that I just wanted to also bring up was under paragraph 36 of the minutes, the annual fraud update. There are a number of counter fraud policies, including like the whistleblowing, the bribery. You know, they're listed on page 180 of our minutes. Sorry, of our papers. We've got the counter fraud, corruption, and bribery strategy. We've got the housing benefit and council tax support, anti-fraud and corruption policy. So those policies, and my question is, when will those be reviewed and looked at? And possibly we can have that as an item to put on our work program. Is anybody able to give us some guidance as to when those policies will be reviewed, Rodney?
Again, I'd say I've actually got some the good news on the front of our fraud resource. You may be aware that actually we had a vacancy within our team for a fraud officer, and actually we had interviews literally yesterday to fill that vacancy. So
Wonderful.
once that person is now in post, that will then give us that bit more capacity to actually look at some of these policies and update them, because I'm sure when they come in, they will want to be looking at them and updating them. So actually, I will task them with an early look at some of these policies so they can actually review them so as soon as possible.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Rodney. But I think now we're going to go back to you, Rodney, because we're going to be looking at the draft statement of accounts for 1920. And if you
Councillor
could
Vincent
just...
has a hand raised.
Ah, sorry, I didn't see that. Sorry. Karen?
Thank you. I had my virtual hand up, which was a bit smaller, so sorry about that. Just going back to a matter arising on page 10 under item 34, and sorry, I should have raised this a little bit earlier. It's where it says, it's the third paragraph from the bottom of the page, with regard to fees and charges, it was noted that the scale of fees would be impacted by the additional work performed in relation to the new risk of incorrect apportionment of recharged expenditure overheads. I just wondered if we had an answer on that. I know the scale of fees is on the agenda, but it shows no change in the figure. So I don't know if there's somebody could, Rodney or somebody could help us with that one. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Right, so at the moment, the external auditors haven't indicated an extra fee for this extra piece of work for the sharing of the resources and the cost charging. They're likely to do that only at the end of the audit once they work out what impact that would be. However, I'd expect that actually change to be fairly small, as in hundreds of pounds at the most, but we will have to see and wait for that. However, just regard to the audit fees, I probably need to just inform the members that actually, as a group of Norfolk finance officers, we've actually written back to PSAA the other day, raising concerns about the proposed increases that EY are putting forward for our fees generally, because they are approaching, suggesting a 40% increase in fee levels, and we're obviously sort of going back and challenging them on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Karen. Right. So I must now remember to actually be looking up rather than looking at the faces. Sorry about that, Karen. Right, Rodney, before you go and present your report on the statement, can you just give us a little bit of a timeline as to why we're looking at these accounts now, and the process by which they will be audited, and then looked at again and signed off by yourself, and then eventually the public will be able to see the external auditor's opinion in there, and etc.
Well, thank you very much, Grant. So actually we're going to do a bit of a double act between myself and Darren, who's a corporate accountant, who's very much been instrumental in pulling these accounts together. So he knows the detail in these accounts better than I do. But I will just start off with a quick introduction sort of thing, because this year is slightly unusual. In a normal year, we have to produce our accounts and I have to sign them by the end of May, and they then have to be approved and sort of signed off by the end of July by external audit. With COVID-19, the rules have been changed by government, and now we have to approve them, or I have to approve them by the end of August, and then they should be audited and published by the end of November. So very much we've got the opportunity this year to bring these accounts to you at the moment for you to have a look at the draft accounts. You can then make any comments or questions, and I've got the opportunity to amend the accounts before I formally approve them by the end of August. Once we've approved these will then be subject to audit by external audit, and they'll be coming in August and September very much to do the audit of these accounts. Once they've actually reviewed their accounts, we'll come back to this committee again with the final version of the accounts for you to be aware of any issues that EY have raised, and for us to ask you to formally approve the accounts ready for final publishing. So actually we're aiming to do that at the meeting in November. The other thing I think I'd just like to mention is actually these accounts are complicated. They are a very long document. Unfortunately, we do have to follow the guidance that is out there about how our accounts have to look, what information we have to include. And in particular, our accounts are a bit odd in that not only do we have to follow accounting practice, but there's various statutory overrides, which means that we have to present the information as per the accounting policies and then amend them to take account of any statutory changes. So our accounts do look a bit odd in that we not only have an accounting basis for preparing information, but we also have a funding basis. So actually where you'll see the figures, in some places they are presented differently because of the different bases. But very much, we're not expecting members to be accounting experts in this, and actually it's perfectly understandable actually if there are bits that some of the detailed stuff that is quite difficult to follow. But actually this is where I'll try and give you the assurance, and actually you can get assurance that accounts are reasonable and accurate, because actually you have got a professional team of officers pulling these together on your behalf. You can also get assurance because actually our financial systems are controlled, they're reviewed by internal audit, and actually we do have a comprehensive program of how we have to pull this information together. We have a timetable, we go to update courses and things like that to make sure that we produce these accounts in the best way possible in accordance with the rules we're required to follow. But saying that, it is up to members to actually review the accounts and ask questions. And I think it would be useful now if I ask Darren to actually point out some of the key information in the accounts to highlight this to yourselves. Okay, Darren, to take that over, please.
Brilliant. Thank you, Darren, and welcome to the meeting.
Thank you very much. So I'll just draw your attention to certain pages of the document. So rather than go through the whole thing, I'll just point out some pertinent parts. So if you, on your documents, if you could just go to page 29. Sorry, my mistake. 27, we'll go to 27 first, the comprehensive income and expenditure account. Are you there?
Yep.
Excellent. So this is the way that we show all the expenditure and income for services. And we can get to the point based on accounting regulations where we can see whether we've achieved a surplus or deficit for the year. So if you just on about 3/4 of the way down, you can see the surplus or deficit on provision of services. And at this draft stage, we're reporting a surplus of £183,000. So this is once all the service expenditure and income is taken into account, plus any other income or expenditure that we incur. So that's our council tax income, our business rates income, any interest owed or due to us from our investments, and movements on the pension fund. Now, Rodney mentioned that some of those transactions then have to be reversed or changed because of the statutory overrides. So on the face of a normal profit and loss type statement, that would be where, although it would be slightly less complicated than what we've got on the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, that's where your position would end. But if you scroll down to page 28, the movement in reserve statements gives you an indication of which of those transactions have to be reversed out. So it's mainly capital items and again charges to the pension fund and also some of the charges to the collection fund. So when you reverse these transactions, what we've ended up with is a net addition to the general fund. So that's the main fund that we have on the balance sheet that can fund our services of £1,047,000. So if you can see the balance there on page 28 at 31st of March 2019 was 14,299,000, and then at the 31st of March 2020 we've got to 15,346,000. If you scroll now down to the next page onto the balance sheet, that's our assets and liabilities that we hold at the council. So our total net assets are 15 million. And there are some key points here where obviously that's an increase in our total net assets, and how those assets are funded are below in the reserves section. Just a few key points there. Our assets held for sale, you can see there's a difference there between 2019 and 2020. That's due to the addition onto our balance sheet of the unsold or subject sold to contract houses at the Rosebery Road development, Broadland growth. There's an increase in cash and cash equivalents. That's due to the fact that at the 31st of March, we did retain quite a bit more liquid cash than we would normally due to the COVID-19 situation. And we were in a situation where we needed cash for various things. And the other major increases on the balance sheet are increases to short-term debtors and short-term creditors. And these are both increased due to the large volume of still community infrastructure levy payments or receipts that are still unresolved at the end of the year. And they are significantly greater this year. And I think that's because there's a huge amount of invoices that have been raised to various developers in the district, and they remain on our balance sheet as unpaid invoices at the end of the year. So once you've progressed through the main statements, there's obviously notes to the accounts. I don't intend to go through every single note, but just to point out that on pages 45 to 47, we've included some additional information regarding aspects of the COVID-19 outbreak. So as this condition obviously existed on the 31st of March, this will have to be reported as an adjusting event to the accounts. But the full impact of the outbreak won't really be reflected in the accounts at 2021. That's where we'll see the full impact of what we're going through at the moment. But in terms of our going concern, there's a detailed analysis on those 2 pages, which I know Rodney and some of the other officers have undertaken to reassure you that we are a going concern at the 31st of March point. And it gives some detail there about where we think possible adjustments in expenditure and income are going to affect us. There's one other thing to note, that on page 64, the officer's remuneration note is not included in these draft accounts at the moment. We're currently obtaining just legal advice prior to the inclusion of this note, and that's due to the sensitivity of some of the information is contained that relates particularly to individuals. So we're just receiving advice at the moment on that, so it will be included in a further version. Other things to note are the pension fund. The details of the pensions fund are on page 67. There's extensive information there on the pension fund. The things to note are the value of the assets in the pension fund reduced by 3 million to 56 million. But the liabilities in the pension fund have also reduced from 10 million down to 81.2 million. And that's primarily due to changes in financial assumptions by the pension fund. So the overall deficit on the pension fund has decreased from 31 million to 24 million. The other items to note are just at the end of right at the end of the statement is the collection fund statement, and that just details all of the transactions with our preceptors, because the council acts as the billing authority, so we collect council tax and business rates and distribute certain amounts to precepts to Norfolk County Council, the police and central government for the various 2 taxes. And I think the only other thing to note is, as these are in a draft state, we're doing some further work on some of the investments that we hold. Some of the investments we hold are pooled funds. And at the 31st of March, one of them showed significant unrealized losses. And there's a certain way that we can treat that in the accounts now, due to the introduction of IFRS 9, that we're still looking at. So these accounts at the moment are subject to that change in particular, although there may be other things that we look at, but that's where we are at the moment.
Right. Well, thank you, Rodney. Sorry, Darren. Thank you.
No problem.
I've got Rodney on my mind because it was
That's okay.
Rodney who introduced the the report.
Okay, I don't mind taking the credit for Darren's work. I'm quite happy to do that.
Well, firstly, let me just say thank you very much, Darren, because we can see that you, well, Rodney, you and your team as a whole have performed an excellent piece of work here. I know that it's very complicated and complex, and I think it's excellent that you've been able to get this far to produce something that we can actually look at this time. I've got a list of questions which I wanted to go through, and if it's okay, I'll go through those questions and items of clarity that I'll be looking for, and then open it up to other members who may also wish to ask questions, because I can see, Karen, you're also nodding your head. You've got some questions as well. Adrian, I know that we still got a good time, so if you've got any questions, and you, Sue, as well, if you've got any questions, we can go into that. I did make a note which I thought might be helpful to just ask Rodney and Darren as well. And if I may, a lot of the stuff has been written down, so I'll be reading it out. The accounting systems that are used by Broadland, is this a different accounting system to the one used by South Norfolk Council? And then also, are they bespoke? Are they desktop-based or are they cloud-based? Are they technologically advanced that we need to continually upgrade these accounting systems? Then the second lot of questions relate to do they assist with the production of the working papers, which are key to supporting the external auditor's work? Thirdly, with regard to the allocation of expenditure between Broadland and South Norfolk, does the system assist with this, or do you have to manually do the calculations for each department or service area? Because working papers are key, as I say, for external audit. And then I also serve on another panel where we've been taken on a tour of the facility. So I'm just wondering whether it's possible to be given a tour of the accounting system and or perhaps the accounts post-year end preparation process when it's COVID safe, of course, just to help members of the committee understand what's involved and where information is coming from for the preparation of the annual accounts. So I don't know if you want to go through those questions first, or if you're going to, because there's as I say, there's quite a number of questions. So I'll hand over to Rodney for now.
Well, thank you. As I say, do point out if I don't cover them all, but actually the first one I think you mentioned was about the systems. So for Broadland, we use Civica Financials, but South Norfolk use Integris. So we do have different finance systems for the two councils. One of the projects that we have got down as a priority project for the Spark work to review our processes is to look at our systems to see actually whether there is any benefit of actually moving to a single system, be it one of the existing ones or even potentially a new system. Both of the systems are actually they're up to date, they're reasonably good, they're not bespoke, they are off-the-shelf packages. but say I'm sure they can always be improved, and actually with financial systems they do keep developing these, and actually every year or so there are upgrades to all these systems. But it is something we need to be looking at, as in what we do with the two financial systems going forward. But we do need to bear in mind we are separate sovereign bodies, and therefore we will always have to produce two sets of accounts using different information. So we can't just put it all into one system. We'll still have to be able to produce the information for the two councils separately. With regard to the preparation of the accounts, yes, the systems do help in that we get information from the systems to actually help pull these accounts together. However, it is still quite spreadsheet based for actually producing the information. So a lot of the information, we take a download from the financial system, put it into a spreadsheet, which then actually pulls together some of these statements. So actually there is some opportunity there to actually improve the way that we produce these accounts. One challenge we do always find is that every so often the accounting rules change, and therefore you have to represent the information. And that's in some ways that's easier to be done in Excel than it actually is by having to change the underlying information within the system. You also asked about allocations between the two authorities. This very much only started from very much for the senior officers for the whole year, and then for all staff from 1st of January when the one team came in. At the moment, the way we're doing that is we're taking the information from the payroll systems and actually doing the calculations based on the information from the payroll systems, and then uploading information into the accounting packages to make those adjustments in the accounts. Was there another? Oh, well, you asked about the being able to see a bit more information about how we produce this information, actually what the financial systems is. And yes, I'd have no objection to doing that. I don't know if we want to do that as an informal meeting where interested members could actually, we could try and do a Zoom call or something like that to actually show a bit more information of how we work and how this all comes together. So actually, yes, be happy to support that.
Thank you, Rodney. Yes, no, that's very helpful. So what I'm going to do is to just go through some of the questions and then give you a chance to to have a response. I'm going to look firstly at where is it? It's page 22. I wanted to have a little bit more of an explanation on it's at the bottom of the page, the adjustments between the accounting basis and the finance basis. That figure of 1.348 million, that is explained on that page. What is it? Page 28. Movement in reserves statements. Is that because I couldn't? What I'm looking for is I want to be able to tie up the figure of 1,348,000, and I couldn't actually see that figure as a net figure. So just if you can just, because I can see on page 51, I can see the 183,000. I can see that figure. But I couldn't see the 1.3 million figure somewhere in the accounts. Just if you could give us a little bit more explanation on that.
Do you want me to just quickly come back on that one? So that's
yes, sure.
Very much on page 48, the expenditure and funding analysis note, which very much is trying to take, in that first column, it's saying this is a funding basis. And then that last column is showing the accounting basis. So you will see at the end that 183 surplus in the accounting basis, and that tries to show you how it moves from the funding basis. But I agree, it's not particularly clear because the thing that you're missing from there is the transfers to and from earmarked reserves. But actually that's what the purpose of this statement is trying to do, but it is actually very difficult to show this in a clear manner.
Yeah, I like what I see on page 22 because it gives us the full picture. The fact that we made a surplus for the year of 1,047,000. Yeah, because we were given in the previous year, we were given a figure of 1.7 million. That was the surplus that we made, and so it's really to be demonstrated, maybe in the report, where you could say that this is how we get to the surplus for the year of 1,047,000. Because, as I say, I like to be able to tie in these figures with the information that's in the more detailed section of the statement. So that's just something that you can take forward for when you prepare the report, where the audit committee then signs off the accounts, or after, in other words, after you've signed it off. Yeah. So then I'm going on to page 23, where we talk about the third bullet point in the movement in reserves, the authority's capital receipts reserve reduced by that. What I'm just wanting to clarify for members is we talk about the capital receipts reserve. Is there a capital expenditure reserve? Just give us a more clearer concept of what this reserve is, if I may.
Darren, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, we've got basically a reserve that includes receipts from sales of land in the past. We've also got receipts where we've had repayments back from loans for capital purposes, and that can only then be used to fund capital expenditure. So we can fund capital expenditure from different ways. We get grants in for disabled facilities grants. We can also use our revenue funding, and we can use capital receipts. What we've tried to do, as our capital receipts are reasonably healthy, that's kind of our main port of call, really. If we've got the receipts there that we can fund the capital expenditure, then that doesn't need to add extra pressure to the general revenue reserve. So that's just indicating that that's how much of the capital programme was funded this year, or 1920, through capital receipts.
Okay,
So
no, that's brilliant. I was just because it's talks about the capital receipts reserve, and to me it's really the capital reserve for the capital income and expenditure. But it's just referred to as the receipts. So
right, okay,
I was wondering about the expenditure side of it. Yeah. Right, I was going to look at the about the short-term debtors and credits, but that is dealt with further on. I'm not going to talk about that. When you look at on page 24, the collection fund, second paragraph, it says in 2019-20, BDC raised £84.2 in council tax. Is that not 84.2 million? Because I seem to think that that's the figure in the collection fund statement.
Yes, it is 84.2 million. If we'd only collected 84 pounds, we would be in severe financial difficulty.
I know. I was just a little concerned that I think there should be an M there.
Yes.
So yeah, if you can just make that correction. So that was 24. Then we go on to page 29. And I just wanted to ask about the revaluation reserve, and just question that those are assets that are owned by Broadland District Council. They're not shared ownership or anything like that. They're not leased assets. They are just assets that are purely owned by Broadland that have been revalued. Super,
That is correct.
Sorry, Darren, I can see you nodding your head, so that's brilliant. And we have had an explanation about the pension fund figures going down. So that was one of the questions. Then page 38. Right at the top, we talk about the Norfolk Environmental Waste Limited news. Has contracted to provide recycling sorting. And that is not Norfolk Environmental Waste Services. That is Norse Environmental Waste Services Limited. So that Norfolk Environmental Waste Limited is actually a different company altogether. So if that is something that needs to be corrected in. I did notice that it was in the previous year's accounts also as Norfolk Environmental Waste Limited. So if that can be corrected. Also, we talk about the leases, but I see that IFRS 16 has been deferred until 2021. The question that I was going to ask there was, are we intending to, or have we got a sort of like an inkling that we might like to start trying to reflect our accounts, our leases in terms of IFRS 16 before that date?
So we wouldn't be allowed to actually change our accounts until actually it's reflected in the code of practice. So until our code of practice says we should adopt them, we can't actually adopt them early.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So that's page 38. Then going to page 44, which talks about the accounting standards. We talk about, I think it's the second bullet point, amendments to IAS, that's International Accounting Standard 28, investment in associates and joint ventures. And it says there that this is not expected to have a material impact. Now, because we've got the joint venture with Broadland Growth and with this Norse Environmental Waste Services, is it possible that it may have an impact in the future? That's just the question.
My understanding of that is actually the changes are just minor amendments to actually the standard. It doesn't fundamentally alter that standard. Basically, the IAS 29 is already in existence. It's just that they are making some amendments to it, which we don't think is going to have a material impact on anything that we would have to account for. I think some of these changes are actually for some of the really complicated companies, which we're not for our sort of investments and our associates.
Okay, no, that's fine. You mentioned IAS 29. You are referring to 28?
Sorry, 28. Sorry, yes.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's brilliant. And then I'm just going on to page 52, and I'm intrigued because it has been a bugbear of mine for quite some time. The street lighting. I see that we've received money coming in, 83,000, but we've got money going out in the previous. This I'm talking about the previous year of 68,000, leaving a balance of 15,000. We've then received 111,000, and we've spent 56,000. I'm just curious to know what we've been spending that money on.
My understanding is just the ongoing maintenance and repair of the streetlights in the various areas. So obviously, particularly for this, we get the money from the special expenses to cover the work, and some of that work will actually be cyclical in nature. So actually, there's sometimes a timing difference between when we get the money in and actually when we actually have to spend some of the more significant elements to cover that. So that reserve is very much showing the balance on that we have got in but haven't yet spent.
Because I'm intrigued there that the council initially wanted the parishes to take on those responsibilities, and they would have been faced with those kind of expenditures in respect of the maintenance of those things that they were taking over. So I'm pleased to say that we are still looking after those for the parishes. So that was just a comment. On page 56, it talks about intangible assets, and there's been disposals of £135,000 worth of intangible assets. And I know it talks about what these are, licenses and project implementation costs. Can you give us an indication of what this £135,000 disposal was? Darren.
Good.
Yes, these were, so we had on the balance sheet, we had, it's like various licenses. So one of the biggest ones was Windows 7. So we had that as an asset or an intangible asset, but it had been fully depreciated. So the net effect was the depreciation and the asset were both kind of had kind of negated each other. So we had a review this year just to remove from the balance sheet fully amortized items. So I think Windows 7, I believe, is the main one, but there were lots of others. I went through with Tom Sayer, and we just looked at items that were still on the asset register that had actually been fully amortized. So it's just effectively an accounting entry to take them off, to kind of credit the asset and debit the amortization. So there is, I've got a list of the assets that we went through, but so it's effectively a book entry just to it's just to make the asset register as up to date as we possibly can, really.
Excellent. Just going
I think Susan wants to come in as well, if possible.
Sorry.
Actually, it's a practical thing, really. I keep getting a lot of feedback, and I'm not always hearing people very clearly. It does appear to be related quite often to when Grant has been speaking and left his microphone on. I don't know whether that's an issue, but I'm just constantly getting this feedback, so I can't always hear what you're saying. I'm sorry about that, but
okay, because I don't have any other extra sound going on here. It's just myself. So I don't know. Do other members have the same problem? Okay, I'm just wondering. So Rodney's also getting the same. Right. Because I have to have my microphone on when I'm speaking. So, but I will turn it off when I'm not speaking, if that's okay. Are members happy with that? Okay. Looking at Broadland growth on page 56 as well, the company has estimated 269,000 as a trading profit in 2019-20, and then it talks about the actual profit after tax for the previous year. Is my calculation show that the after tax profit, if it would be helpful if you're comparing apples with apples. So that would be after tax of 218,446 was my calculation of what it would be. So if you're going to talk about the after tax, if you're estimating the after tax amount for the current year, then you're comparing it to the after tax amount or profit for the previous year. So if that's just something you can take note of. Then going on to page 57, we have the long-term debtors. And as I say, we can see that most of those is the SIL payments. And then the paragraph relates to the Parish Council Loan Scheme, which is funded through Broadland Growth. It says there in the middle of that 3 loans have been advanced to the parish councils. Over a period of time that's taken place, has there been any movement like repayments? Because maybe they've received their SIL payments, so therefore they can have those loans partially or in full repaid because they've had those SIL payments? Or what is the situation with regards to those loans that have been advanced? Because we're sitting with the balance of 314,000, and there is a pot only of 500,000. So if 315,000, if there's no movement, all we're doing is we're just giving, and no money's coming back, then it would be helpful to know that when we're looking at the statement. So Darren, over to you.
We have had a couple of repayments, yes, but I believe there were, I'll have to look at the detail, but there were a couple of repayments on 2 of those loans in 1920, and I know we've just received 2 further repayments in May, I think, from 2 of the parishes for their SIL. So we basically debit their SIL, the SIL that they were due, don't we, off of the loan, and 2 of the parishes have done that this year as well. But I can let you have more detail on that if you wish. But there is a movement both ways. Yeah.
Okay, well that's excellent. Thanks for that, Darren. And then on page 59, let me just go to that page. Right. I was just a little concerned about short-term debtors, the entities and individuals, which is climbing. It's gone up from 2,252,000 in the previous year to 2,973,000, which is that a tendency that's because of COVID? I don't think that because COVID lockdown came in right towards the end of March. Is it something that is slowly but surely getting out of control, or is it something that we're going to be able to say, right, we are able to manage this and we're managing it downwards rather than it continually going up? Darren?
I don't have that information, Darren. We might have to come back that one.
I would have to come back to you on that one. I don't have that information at hand regarding the detail behind that. I would say that it was unlikely to be a COVID-related issue at that point. But I'd have to get more detail on that. I don't think, as far as I'm aware, there's a particular issue. I don't know if it could have been skewed by a few particularly large debtors within that amount. But I can certainly find out for you and feedback to you.
I get the feeling that might have been a bit confused by the charging between the 2 authorities. That might have been a factor as well, because obviously with the joint working, we're now having to do some charges between South Norfolk and Broadland, so that might be an effect. But actually, we will have a look into that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you for that, Rodney and Darren. Also going down to the bottom of the page, we talk about the short-term creditors. And again, here we're looking at the other entities and individuals, and here I'm looking at, they've gone up. And these, I presume, are a lot of our trade creditors. So because of the fact that they're increasing also, is there perhaps a problem with us paying them on time, or is because I'm aware that in some councils they have it as a key performance indicator that they need to pay within 30 days or within 60 days at the very latest. So is there a problem that we have with regards to our payment system?
No, I think there's no issue. We are paying suppliers promptly, and indeed, as part of COVID-19, we'd made sure that actually, rather than waiting for 30-day payment terms, we're making sure that actually we pay any approved invoices as soon as they are due. So again, I think we just need to go back and actually look at the detail to explain that to members.
That's brilliant. Thank you. That one. Then I was, and of course, Darren, I'm not sure. I think it might have been Rod. Yes, no, Darren, you did mention about the officers' remuneration. Just to be satisfied that you've taken the figures from the payroll and you have incorporated those into the account. It's not something that it says to be added later, that it's the note that's going to be added later. The figures are already in the accounts, which would indicate also, oh, bless you, Rodney. Yes. I couldn't see anywhere in the accounts that there was a reference to officers' remuneration. Now, normally when I'm looking through the accounts and the balance sheet, for example, I see under the notes column, there's reference to all the different notes. I didn't see any notes to referencing across to note 25. Also on that, with regards to note 25, I don't know what the format of that note is going to be, but I was also wondering whether it is, because we have got, it's actually quite a significant item that the external auditors are going to be looking at. Is this split between the costs for Broadland and South Norfolk? Is it going to be, or can you put into these notes something like an explanation about how the figure was arrived at that is shown as the apportioned cost for Broadland as opposed to South Norfolk? That's just the question that I have under officers' remuneration.
If I can just come back on that. So what this note will show, in line with actually the requirements in the code, is firstly it lists the senior officers. So this will be every member, all the managing director, the directors and all the ADs, and they'll all be listed with a note saying these costs are shared between the two authorities. There'll then be a table listing all the staff that are earning over £50,000, very much saying these are the number of staff in each band of category. And the third element of this note is very much about exit packages. So where staff have left the organisation and actually where they've been entitled to any exit packages, then again, there'll be some information about the cost of these exit packages to the councils.
Thank you, Rodney. That's very helpful. Just going on to page 65, members and chief officers. If we look at the, so I presume it's something like a declaration of interests, etc. The second bullet point refers to Councillor Sean Vincent and Trevor Holden, Managing Director, are directors of Broadland Growth. I was under the impression that Councillor Lana Himsel was also a director. At least that's what Companies House reflects. It talks about the bottom there of that note. It says none of the three named above. So I assume that is on the Declaration of Interests form, that Lana Himsel is also a director. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's an error that we will need to correct.
Right. And then I think I have the last question on page 66. We look at the finance lease where the council is the lessee. And reading the last paragraph of that section, the council is committed to making minimum payments for the contract. This includes an element separated to represent the deemed finance lease, etc. The final lease payment for the vehicles of 120,000 was made in 1920. So that's why we're looking at the end of 2020 as a value of 0. So just a quick question. Are we now no longer paying a lease for these vehicles? So is there a reduction in the charge that the contractor that we pay to the contractor until the end of that contract?
Do you know, Darren? Sorry.
Yes, effectively, yes. So because we had the waste vehicles on a 5-year finance lease. So once we'd calculated what those lease payments would be, we would then normally renegotiate another 5-year period. But as we're kind of we're not sure where the next stage of the waste contractors are going to go. We had an agreement with Veolia that that lease period would stop, and we would continue to use those vehicles for the next couple of years. But they would take on all of the repairs and responsibilities for them. So effectively, rather than going into a very short-term lease for new vehicles for a short period of time, those vehicles, which are effectively ours because they're just used on the Broadland District Council refuse collection runs, they would just wind those down over the next couple of years, but it wouldn't impact on us in terms of further lease payments.
Thank you for that, Darren. And so that finishes my questions on the statement of accounts. And so now I'm looking across to Karen and Susan. Adrian is still here, and Nigel. On the accounts, are there any questions that they wish to ask about the statement of accounts? So I'm looking across, and Karen, Adrian, because Adrian is going to be leaving. Karen, if you don't mind, I'll just ask Adrian to come in.
Yeah.
So over to you, Adrian.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief. Yeah, just a couple of questions. I'm interested on page 22, just in respect of interest receivable, which went, I think budget was 246, the actual was 690. It was just how that had increased so much, given we're in a very low and flat rate interest rate period. And my second question really is on 27, which was regarding the top box there about how the net expenditure was and the variances between 2018-19 restated 2019-20, that there are differences. For example, managing director was 457 net expenditure in previous year, 876 this year. There's those discrepancies between it. Is that a restatement of where activities have changed within the roles in the council, why there's so many variances between the 2-year figures? And most of the other ones the chairman has covered off for me already.
Right, so who's going to take that, Rodney?
The first question, the interest, I think the interest budget was probably set lower than it should have been. And actually, we haven't been able to magic extra interest out for the authority. It's just probably our budget was too low, but we can have a bit more of a detail to actually come back on that one. The second point was about the variances in the comprehensive income and expenditure account. So these can be sort of difficult, say, to actually be exactly comparable between one year and another year, because things do change within the year, and we'd have to look at individual variances to try and actually understand what the differences are. So actually, if there's specific ones you'd like us to investigate, we can come back with a bit more information on them. But very much this is broken down by an individual line by line basis of every single cost in the council within these different areas. So we just need to work out what those differences are. And this is the sort of thing that actually external audit look at. They will actually do that comparison and challenge us to provide explanations. So actually, if members would like an explanation, for instance, on the economic growth one, which has changed quite considerably, we can do that in a bit more detail. Unless, Darren, you know some of these off the top of your head. Sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, my clarity was, as I say, picking up on what you said there, Rodney, the net difference is very little. It's 12.1 to 12.5. So overall, there hasn't been any major change. It was very much to your point, like economic growth, sort of 2 million difference in there. Was it just a reapportionment of duties between the different cost lines, I guess?
There certainly is some of that, because actually we have had to do some changes, but I think I'll need to come back to you with some of the detail on that.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. I see we have gone past it's now 11.
Yeah, I was going to say,
you've got to dash off to your meeting. So thank you very much for your attending.
No,
And,
thank you, Chairman.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah, bye everyone.
Cheerio. Right, Karen, you wanted to ask some questions as well now.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Rodney and Darren, for your report. I don't underestimate the amount of work that goes into preparing a set of accounts, so thank you very much for bringing the draft to us at an early stage so we can comment. It is appreciated, thank you. And also, Rodney, I was just going to say thank you for explaining about the next steps in the process. That was going to be one of my questions, so you've knocked one of my questions off, so thank you very much for that. If I can just quickly flick through, I do have a handful of questions, so I apologise in advance for that. The first one was on page 22. Oh no, that's been covered off by Adrian. I guess I just want to start by just saying it's a positive set of accounts in that we have a £1 million revenue, a positive revenue outturn that's going to increase our reserves. So I just want to acknowledge that's a positive outcome. So that's good news. My question about interest has been covered. The next one was around the pension fund, and I know that was acknowledged in the presentation. I just wondered, is there any likelihood that that might be restated once the auditors review the accounts? I know we've had that experience before.
Right. Well, actually, this is where we've been able to, because there's been a delay in when we've had to approve these accounts. Actually, we've actually been able to get the year-end figures from the county council, and actually we've amended these to take account of the actual asset valuations at the 31st of March. Normally, well, what we had to do, we actually did a first draft on the estimates, and then the final figures came in and we actually amended them before they've come to yourselves. So actually we are optimistic that these figures will stand and will not be changed.
Thank you. That's another positive. That's good news. The other was page 23. No, I've done that one. Bear with me while I just flick through. Page 25, under future plans, it talks about the impact on the medium-term financial plan and a funding gap of approximately £1 million. I just wondered, is that after the additional £1 million that's been taken into reserves that we've just acknowledged, or so would that negate that, or is there still a £1 million funding gap?
So this is the difference between what we're expecting our income to be and what our expenditure will be. So actually looking ahead, we're saying that potentially a difference. We should be spending £1 million more each year than we get in income. And obviously we've now got an extra £1 million in reserves, which would help us bridge that gap if we needed to. But obviously we've only got that money in the reserves. We can only be used once yeah. When this is a long-term issue. But the other thing very much on the medium-term financial strategy, we've been quite prudent on some of our assumptions about future funding, about what's happening with new homes, bonus monies and things like that. So if we have a positive outcome from the spending review and the financial statement, that gap could close. But obviously with COVID-19 and the extra financial pressures nationally, that does raise concerns there as well. But until we get that funding announcement later on and understanding what the situation is for local government, it is quite unclear at the moment what the long-term prognosis is.
Okay, no, thank you. Page 28 and 29. Apologise, it is just a very pedantic point and it's just a rounding adjustment. So the balance on, and I know that having produced accounts myself, if someone picks it up, it is a bit frustrating. So I do apologise. But page 28, the balance as at 31st, 2019, you've got 22228. On the next page is 2227. And I know it will just be a formula and an adjustment, but I thought you probably already picked it up, but just in case, just highlight that one. I was going to ask about assets held for sale, but you've kindly answered that one. Next one's on page 35, where it talks about financial liabilities consist of embedded leases. Just wondered if Rodney or Darren could help me understand that statement, please. I wondered what they are.
The embedded leases were the finance leases that we were just talking about regarding the waste vehicles.
Oh, right, okay.
So that just relates to those. They're the only embedded leases that we have or had, because they're now come to an end. So that just relates to those.
Okay.
They're often, those terms are sort of interchangeable sometimes,
Yeah.
embedded and finance lease, I think.
Thank you, Darren. I think I was confused because later on page 39 it says we don't currently have any, and that, I guess it's a time in different. That explains it. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
My next one was about heritage assets on page 37, about the timing of the valuation. I know that they're valued every 5 years. I just wondered where we are on that cycle.
So we don't actually value heritage assets because they're held at just the cost, which is nil. It's the other assets in the council we revalue. Heritage assets aren't actually revalued.
Okay, it's just a statement at the end, and maybe I'm misreading it. It said the valuation will be reconsidered at least every 5 years.
Yes, we will consider whether or not to continue them at historical cost.
Okay.
And it's, to be honest, it's very unlikely we would ever change it, but we do just need to occasionally think, is that still correct?
Yeah. When did we last make that judgment? Was that?
I'm not sure. It's the Bure Valley bridges that are heritage assets, aren't they? So because they're partly managed by Norfolk County Council, I know they were due to carry out a review quite soon, I think. So they kind of liaise with the Planning and Conservation Department just to see when they're actually going to do those. But I think that's mainly for our information, really, because as he said, we don't hold them on the balance sheet at particular value. I think it's just for us to know, and it's tied into condition surveys as well, I think.
Okay.
But when that was, I don't know, but I can check for you.
I was going to say, if that's something that could be checked offline and let us know, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, will do.
Covered that one. I think the benefit of going towards the end, a lot of my questions have been asked and answered, so that's good news. I think that they were the main ones I have that haven't already been asked. The other was just around the stock, the PPE. That was clearly a significant purchase, and that was shown on page 30. I recognise the cash flow statement. That was a snapshot at that point in time. That's probably why it looked so high, being just before the end of March. So that was more of an observation. I've talked about that. I think we've covered all my questions, so thank you very much. My only other ones were to do with the annual governance statement. I see the draft statement as part of this item, but it's also further on in the agenda. It's repeated under item 11. So I don't know if you want my comments at that point rather than now.
If possible, could we do that as item 11, please?
11, yep, we'll do. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karen. Just to follow up on the question you asked about the pension valuation, I just wonder if it is a situation where the external auditor comes along and says, no, we're not satisfied with those figures, and they want to make an adjustment or insist on making an adjustment. Will that impact on our surplus for the year in any way?
No, it doesn't, because the pension is one of these ones that is the funny sort of difference between the accounting basis and the funding basis. So actually it changes the accounting basis, but actually our funding basis is very much based on the contributions that we agree to the pension fund every year. So actually it will change the value of the asset or liability, but it won't change the underlying impact on the general fund outturn.
Right, thanks, Rodney. I'm looking at Sue and just wondering if there's any questions that she would like to ask. Please go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, I'm not an accountant. I should say that right at the start. So obviously I don't get some of these terms, and it's very kind of you to explain them, and you do make it much easier for me. The only question I really have is about the the surplus that's shown on page 22, and a question as to how that relates to a figure that was suggested at overview and scrutiny of 2.8 million as a favourable variance. How do those two figures marry up is what I'm not sure about, and if anybody could enlighten me, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
So what it is for the year we're expecting to make a deficit of £1.9 million, but in actual fact we've made a surplus of £1 million. So that's nearly a £3 million turnaround. So rather than making a deficit, we've actually made a surplus. So it's a difference between those two numbers. And there is a slight difference between the two numbers about just the timing of those numbers, but that's essentially what it is.
I get you. Thank you. Thank you. I hadn't realised the previous one had been a proposed deficit. So yes, that makes absolute sense. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nigel. You've got some questions. Thank you.
Well, not some, just one. And again, it's sort of partly due to lack of experience. Just looking at page 64, grant income. Everything I see on there makes sense. I fairly certain I understand, apart from one where we've got in the first box, about halfway down it, transparency, and then £8,000. Can you explain what transparency means in this context?
So this would be a grant because we have to publish information like over £500 spend, that sort of information. In order to be transparent, we're required to publish information. And if the government change the rules about what we're meant to publish, they will give us a small grant to help us cover any of the additional costs relating to that. It's all part of the agreement that's been reached that actually, if the government imposes new burdens on councils, they will tend to give us a grant to cover those costs. So that would be, we've got new transparency requirements and the government is given some money to cover those costs.
Okay, that's fine. Nice explanation. Thank you very much indeed, Rodney.
Thanks, Nigel. So those figures remain the same for the previous year. So were there changes that they needed to give us the £8,000 again, or were there no changes in requirements that necessitated them to give us £8,000?
I'm not 100% certain of the detail, but I would expect that this was a change that was made a couple of years ago, and therefore they're funding these ongoing costs every year until there's a reset of our funding formula.
Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. Right, so I don't have any other members wanting to ask questions about the account, so I presume we have to look at, let me just get to my agenda. We have to now agree to note the draft accounts. Let me just go to the recommendation, and that's right at the beginning. And we've just got to the draft accounts are noted by the audit committee. So, members, thank you very much. Rodney, Darren, for all your hard work again. And we do note those. And we thank you for taking account of our questions and answering them as succinctly as you have. And that's absolutely excellent.
Thank you.
We now go on to, I'm just having a look at speed. We've been on for an hour and a half. If we would like to take a 5-minute or 6-minute break, just for a comfort break, I would like to remind members just to please turn their video cameras off and microphones off while they are having a comfort break. So thank you. Right, we're almost everybody there, just waiting for Faye to come back, and then we will be able to resume. Oh, there she is. Right. Just before we go back into session, it's just a brief announcement, and I would like on all members of the committee to wish Faye a very happy birthday today, because it is her birthday today. We're not going to sing, we're just going to acknowledge that it's a birthday.
What a special birthday, hey guys. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, so now we're back in session again. Everybody's there. We're going to go over to Faye to present agenda item 6, which is the internal audit progress report. So over to you, Faye.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first of 3 reports, just mopping up 1920 really. So this is the last progress report that you'll receive from us for 1920, and it takes us right up to year end. You'll see that we were able to complete the plan of programmed work for 1920, finalising 2 reports in this period. The key controls report for Broadland is, however, still in draft, and I've given a little bit of an explanation below in relation to the fact that COVID clearly has disrupted quite a lot of our usual activities for officers and for us really. We have indicated the assurance level. We have provided the executive summary also in Appendix 2. I don't think it's likely to change, certainly not in terms of an increase in recommendations. So I'm fairly comfortable with the assurance level given there, and I think it's right that we provide it so that you can see it. Our hope is to have that finalised as soon as possible, and certainly by the next meeting that should be in place. So we've also managed to finalise planning and development as well in this period, and that was a joint review that took place across Broadland and South Norfolk and picked up on quite a lot of points in relation to sort of housekeeping around planning processes. As we've got quite a lot on the agenda today, I didn't want to go into too much detail on the exec summaries and just hand over to you guys really as to whether there's any questions on specifics in relation to the executive summaries.
Right, thank you, Faye. Yes, I just had two quick questions, and that was to do with the planning report, and on page 108. Planning applications, it says there an instructional email is sent to staff informing them of the requirement to destroy paper files once the file is closed. Can you just confirm that you do keep a record digitally on a digital management system before you destroy those?
Yeah, clearly we don't want documents being destroyed before we've had a chance to upload them onto the system. And that's something that we're really encouraging both Broadland and South Norfolk to do now, to make sure that everything's captured on a system where you can assign disposal requirements to it. Clearly, as we know from experience, paper files can, they can go missing, they can be lost. So it's a much safer way of storing things. This recommendation reflects that. So keep it on the system, don't store it twice, destroy the file once it's uploaded. Excellent,
thank you for that, Faye. Just another quick question. Under the operational effective matters, second bullet point, to raise with members as an item for consideration if the BDC and SNC cut-off point for members being able to call in items to committee is aligned. Just do you know what the differences between the two authorities?
Yeah, as I said this morning, I'm having a bit of trouble with remote access. It's very, very slow. I have got the report in front of me. If I can scroll to it quickly. Validation check to raise with members.
Because if they've got more time than we have to call in, then we'd like to go to the bigger one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure it's about the specific terms and days. So it says at Broadland District Council, there's a cut-off point for members to call in planning applications into committee, which is at the end of standard consultation period. However, at South Norfolk Council, there is currently no limit on members calling in an item. So we felt that that was worth a discussion between members to ascertain whether the process can be aligned or not. This is just an operational effectiveness matters. It isn't an urgent recommendation or something that we've noted in the findings. It's more just a best practice point really for people to consider. So we'll leave that to management to decide whether it's necessary. But I certainly think it would be a good discussion to have.
Excellent. Thank you. Do any of the other members have questions on that report? I don't see any hands raised up, so we go to the recommendation. And the recommendation is that members note the progress in completing the internal audit plan of work and the outcomes of the completed audit for the 1920 financial year. So thank you for that, Faye. We have now noted that. We then go on to agenda item number 7, which is the internal audit follow-up report, page 110. So again, it's back to you, Faye.
Back to birthday girl. So the follow-up report again mops up 1920. We've looked at all the outstanding recommendations that are currently open at the moment. And we're giving you an update to let you know what we still have and if any of those need to then be considered for the annual governance statement. The most important part of this report and the one that usually generates the most discussion is on Appendix 2. So this is where we've ascertained which urgent and important recommendations are outstanding, and then we provide you with a revised due date and the latest response from management to show why they are overdue. So this is usually one where officers help me to kind of give a picture of what's happening. So if you did have any questions on the specifics for Appendix 2, 3 and 4, please go ahead.
Thank you, Faye. Yes, as everybody is very well aware, I do have an issue with the fact that these recommendations just seem to be given extension upon extension upon extension. And I did mention that under matters arising. And I want those people that are responsible for implementing these recommendations to now implement what I would recommend to have these issues resolved. And I'm going to ask them that they must present a plan of how they're going to implement the recommendation by the due date, and also have that recommendation verified by the due date, and that this plan that they are going to put together must be submitted to the managing director, so we can now go to the managing director and say to him, if those recommendations haven't been, we want an explanation from the managing director as to why those recommendations have not been implemented. So if we can convey a message to the the officers responsible for those recommendations, that we are now taking a far more serious view of these outstanding recommendations, and that they must be resolved as a matter of course, and that relates to all the recommendations that are overdue, not only from the 2017-18 audits, the 18-19 audits, or the 1920 audit. So if you can comment on that, Faye, that would.
Yeah, Chairman, I just wanted to say that I think some of that work has actually already taken place. So very recently, I provide a performance update to CMLT meetings on a quarterly basis, which shows everything that's outstanding. This time, the Trevor Holden took a very keen interest in making sure that we received up-to-date responses and that they were ready and adequate for each committee. I then provided a lot of information to officers, and it isn't just being sent to the responsible officer, they're actually assigned at assistant director level now as well. So in terms of their importance and their priority, they are high up, and I'm very pleased to say that. So I think we just need to keep on at it, and certainly the officers to provide any additional information and assurance that you would require for audit committee. But it's not at the bottom of the list. I can assure you it's definitely something that they're working on, and they want to get them resolved as soon as they can.
Okay, well, we want the managing director to make sure that these things are, when we have our next audit committee meeting in October, these due dates that have been given, I mean, the original due date was the 31st of July 2018, and it's still outstanding. And the revised due date now has been given 31st of September 2020. When we have our meeting in October, I don't want to see that these things are still outstanding. And that's why I'm saying we want to be able to see that the managing director is taking this absolutely seriously, and that he's going to make sure that his staff are implementing these numerous outstanding recommendations. So that's all I have to say. Are there any other? I see Sue wants to say.
Yeah, I think you've pretty much said it really, but it was the quantity that sort of slightly astonished me really. We in previous years, we've not had anything like as many outstanding. Now, I accept that we've had issues this year, but it does seem a lot. So I would like to sort of support the chair on this and just say, you know, they do, it does need attention, prompt attention, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and Karen as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I was going to say the same. It is of concern how many outstanding audits that we have. And so I won't repeat what's already been said, but I share the same concern. One question, and it may be that there's been an update. So a question to Faye, if I may. Mm-hmm. The disaster recovery audit, is there an update on that one?
I think we have Chris waiting to provide us with a bit of an update on that one, actually. Are you there, Chris?
I am indeed, yes.
Here he is.
I am indeed. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, just in terms of where we are with this, if we look at the specific recommendation and the latest response, we're in a period of sort of industrial change at this point in time in terms of our sort of infrastructure. We're in the process of we're beginning to commission brand new infrastructure at both sites. It's going to replace everything we've currently got and fundamentally change the way in which disaster recovery or business continuity takes place. Because of the significant change, it's going to render everything that we previously had irrelevant or null and void, essentially, and being, you know, a new method will be implemented. It's far more sort of robust and resilient and reliable, etc. But the whole process of testing and things like that will be built into the new platforms. So where we have other aspects, such as I think there's reference in this report to generators and things like that, that's still underway. That's still, you know, in play. We still do that. We actually have sort of informal tests, if you will, that take place at places like Carrowbrick, for example. Again, that's referenced in the report. That you know, we undertake exercises there almost on a sort of bi-weekly basis to make sure that everything's spot on and actually working as it is. So as we go through this change, everything that's in place is actually still effective and working. But it will, towards the end of this year, it will dramatically sort of change shape, and then everything will be sort of realigned or republished accordingly. If that makes sense.
Thank you, Chris.
I was just absorbing that. I think it does make sense. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Any other members have any questions?
So you say that you're a complete change. I mean, can you give us any more detail about that? How that change is going to be implemented?
Yeah, absolutely. If we look at disaster recovery as it stands now, we have a number of infrastructure items at Thorpe Lodge. They are replicated to some more infrastructure at Carrowbreck. So that essentially forms the basis of the disaster recovery exercise. So if Thorpe Lodge goes down, everything sort of switches across and operates from Carrowbreck. Currently, that's a very manual and labour-intensive process to achieve, and there's nothing wrong with that per se. It's just that's the way it's always been done historically. The new infrastructure will actually result in a large set of infrastructure, or servers, if you will, sitting at Thorpe Lodge, and the equivalent number sitting at South Norfolk House. Those two systems will replicate information literally on an hourly basis, backwards and forwards all day long, 24/7, 365. So for example, if South Norfolk House goes offline, all of the data in there, or that's stored there, is actually already been mirrored across the Thorpe Lodge, so people can then just access it and carry on as normal. The sort of switch over in the event of a disaster is fully automated, and will literally take seconds rather than days. So it's a much more effective sort of method of recovery, essentially. It means we don't really have to recover, we just carry on.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. That's the sort of thing I wanted to know about, really. So thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, anybody else got any questions on that report? Yes, Karen?
Sorry, in case you may have said it, and I'm sorry if I missed it. So until that point where we have those new two mirrored systems in place, how vulnerable are we to, what is the risk for Broadland?
It's quite low, really. I'd say it's quite low. I mean, the risk now is no greater than it has been at any point in the last sort of 5-10 years, I'd say. There is always the possibility of electrical failure or power cuts, things like that, but there's certainly no higher risk now than there has been for years. So it's quite if anything, the risk has been diminished by the fact that we're already beginning to sort of mirror the data again on top of the current DR capabilities for sort of testing purposes. So we have sort of more safety nets in place.
Okay, thank you.
During the report, I think it's important to note we didn't necessarily find any specific issues with this setup. It was more just making sure that we regularly test these systems to make sure that they're adequate in place. And also the outstanding one relates to making sure that procedures are up to date. It doesn't make much sense to, until all of these new procedures are in place, to then update it afterwards in terms of officer time. So that's why we've left that one outstanding and put a new date on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Faye. Yes. Nigel, you also had your hand up?
Yeah, it's not a question. I just wanted to concur with you, Chair. Thank you about the outstanding internal audit recommendations and the very, very long delay on particularly the first one. But I just think back to my time at work. If something came in, I was expected to deal with it within a matter of days. I mean, as you said yourself quite rightly, we're looking here at over 2 years on this first one, which does seem a little bit unreasonable. So I fully concur with what you said earlier on about getting these called in and sorted out. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Any more questions from any other members? Right, we then go on to the recommendation, and that is to, let me just get to the report is for members to note the position in relation to the completion of agreed internal audit recommendations, which yes, we have done, and we have gone through that. So we now move on to the next item, agenda item number 8, which is the annual report and opinion for 2019-18. So over to you again, Faye.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this report summarises the previous two and the 1920 internal audit plan, essentially. Most of you, I think, will be familiar with the layout of it, but we highlight any issues that we feel are relevant enough to be included in the annual governance statement, which is coming a little bit later on in the agenda. At 2.2, you'll see the opinion itself. So we have a positive opinion on the control framework here, reasonable. We carried out 10 assurance reports, and 9 of those were positive assurance. We have previously reported to the Audit Committee the limited assurance report on private sector housing, homelessness and housing options. We have actually had 3 substantial audit opinions this year as well, so that's very positive. We've also looked at the risk maturity of the organisation, and we've highlighted that we need to make improvements in that area, and you'll see the risk management policy a little later on in the agenda also. Any changes to the plan that we've made over the year can be seen at 3.3. Follow-up we've had in the previous report, this section just summarises that. At 3.5, you'll see those urgent and important recommendations that we are saying we feel should be included within the annual governance statement. Management are working on those. They're not due yet. They will be resolved by September 2020. We will be requiring, obviously, assurance and evidence to show that those are signed off and complete, but until they are, the risks remain. So we feel that they should be highlighted. Again, you can see there, 1920, we've just highlighted the things that need improvement in terms of the risk management framework, and are working on those, and we can go into those in a bit more detail either now or later on. The section 5 onwards talks about our quality assurance process. So we assess ourselves internally against the criteria of the public sector internal audit standards. And we also have an external audit of our standards and how we comply with those, carried out every 5 years. And the last one was done in January 2017. So we've got a little while yet, but nothing to note there in terms of non-compliance. Performance indicator outcomes is quite interesting. This is how I assure myself that the contractor is performing in line with our KPIs. So you'll see each of them included there, and how we measure up against those. The only one that we haven't been able to achieve was in relation to a performance report that is provided by the contract manager. It was 1 day late, and I know that seems a bit pedantic, but I thought it best to be transparent in the report about the fact that we hadn't managed to achieve that one. But everything else looks positive. At 5.3, we also compare our services against the SIPFA role of the head of internal audit. No issues to note there. At Appendix 1, you've got a summary of all of the audit reports that we've carried out, the assurance level, the number of recommendations raised, and then where we are in terms of implementation of those. And the breakdown of assurance levels. So as I said, you can see we've got 3 substantial, which is brilliant, 6 reasonable, and 1 limited assurance in homelessness. At Appendix 2, you've got your assurance chart, and that just covers us across the last 5 years, what the gradings have looked like and how they've improved over that time. So that's a bit more of a graphical representation of the assurance levels given. And then Appendix 3 is just our limitations and responsibilities statement. And you receive the same wording every year on that. So I'll pass it over to you if you had any questions on that particular report.
Thank you, Faye. Right, do any members have any questions on that report? Right, just one question from myself. and that relates to page 129, second last paragraph. In the 2019-2020, the internal audit manager concluded that a risk maturity level of the council is currently at a level of risk aware during assessment. Goes on to say a series of recommendations have been suggested to strengthen the risk management framework. We've got a couple of questions on what follows. So the first one is including the creation of a strategic risk register. So the question is, how is the creation of the strategic risk register progressing? The second thing is, it then goes on to say revision of the risk management policy. And that is, we are looking at agenda item number 10, which deals with the risk management policy. Just to clarify that when it says that it is going to revise the risk management policy, is this a new policy that you're going to be bringing to us in agenda item 10, or is it the revision of an existing risk management policy? And then it goes on to say, and thirdly, for the audit committee to receive regular assurance on the framework in line with the terms of reference. So the question on that is, when will we start receiving those regular assurances? And do we need to have this as a standing agenda item, or is this going to be incorporated into our work program? So thank you. If I can just go back to you, Faye.
Leave me with those questions. I'll try and answer all of those. So firstly, the register. As you know, internal audit, because we need to provide you with independent assurance over the framework, we can't be responsible for any of this work, but we can certainly support the improvements and provide guidance to management. The transformation team are working with CMLT currently to put together a new strategic risk register based on the current business plan and the framework and also the risk profile at the moment, given that everything has changed quite significantly due to COVID. So that is in progress. We'll have a set of strategic risks that we can look at. They'll be very high level, and we'll be able to see what kind of gradings they've been given and if they're in line with the appetite that's been agreed and is included within the policy. So that is certainly underway, and I'm kind of involved in the discussions with that. I'll see early drafts of it also as well, and have input into that process. The policy itself, we had a risk management strategy at Broadland that was quite out of date and wasn't in line with best practice, which was some of the recommendations and points raised as part of the maturity assessment that I carried out last year. So the decision was made to complete a new policy that reflected the kind of framework that would represent best practice. So that is a new policy for you to look at later on in the agenda. It may need, and this is exactly why it's been brought to you, we want to make sure that you're happy with it. There may be some tweaks in terms of governance that we may want to address. I know at the moment that Overview and Scrutiny Panel had a role in looking at performance and risk. And if we now bring the register and the report to Audit Committee as well, are we going to be duplicating that process? So I'd really like it if we could have discussion about that a bit later on. But yes, it is a new policy grant. And then lastly, regular assurance. We'll have to liaise with our colleagues in Democratic Services. The first step in this process is to get that policy and risk appetite approved by full council. And that's why it's come to you today for recommendation. Obviously, we may need to make some tweaks before it goes, but we'd quite like your assistance with that in terms of reviewing it and then asking for it to be endorsed for approval. After that, we can then look at new formats, the new strategic register, and getting those updates into the timetable and into the agenda pack. So I don't have a firm timeline in place, but once we've got the policy approved and through, and the new strategic risk register has been finalised, I can't see why that wouldn't be on the agenda for next time or even the time after for audit committee. We certainly want to see that happening as soon as possible. Did I get everything there?
Yes, you did. I'm just going to have, you just have to excuse me for a second. I've got a dog barking in the background there, which I need to shut up.
Okay.
Sorry about that. It is a nuisance when dogs make so much noise. Does any other do any of the other members have any questions on that report? Karen, do you have?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Faye, for your report. I just had one question. It's really to help my understanding on the paragraph 3.5, where you were talking about the items to include in the annual governance statement. And I know that it is a positive result that you got 9 out of 10 had been a positive assurance, but it's the one that wasn't. I'm just trying to understand what the concerns are there, and I know there's some they're set out on page 129. How close are we to resolving that?
So as I understand, the report came to you with the executive summary in a previous committee, so it would have gone into quite a bit more detail there about some of the control issues that we had in that area. I know that because of the assistant director now being responsible for that area and the two teams looking at their processes and how they differ, there's a lot of work that's due to take place now and ongoing, really, in terms of what they want to the new procedures to look like. We've picked up on control issues that need resolving. Some of these are control issues that you can also see at South Norfolk, but some of them are unique to Broadland. So they've given a deadline of September 2020, so we clearly need to monitor those through to completion. But yeah, it's just the urgent and important recommendations that we've highlighted there that we really feel we just need to reference those until they are resolved.
Thank you, Faye. Sorry to be difficult, but can you remind me what those urgent and important ones are?
Yeah, so the first one on the bullet point list for page 129.
Oh, yeah.
So that was, we had one urgent and the rest were important. So each one is bullet pointed there. So they are the issues that we think need to be raised there. So the first one in relation to rent accounts, making sure that we're regularly reviewing those. We spotted instances where people weren't being charged for temporary accommodation. So that's why that's an urgent recommendation, because clearly that represents income that we've missed out on. But yeah, those are quite significant, and they are in here because they're not completed yet. They're still risks to the council, so that's why we feel they need to be highlighted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Did you want to say anything more? Yeah, no. Okay. Anybody else got anything that they want to add? No. Right. So we go back to the recommendation, and the recommendation is to receive and consider the contents of the annual report and opinion of the head of internal audit. B, to note that a reasonable audit opinion has been given in relation to framework of governance, risk management and control for the year ended 31st of March 2020. C, to note that the opinion expressed together with significant matters arising from internal audit work and contained within this report should be given due consideration when developing and reviewing the Council's annual governance statement for 2019-20. And D, to note the conclusions of the review of the effectiveness of internal audit. So thank you. We have noted, we received and noted that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Faye. So that then brings us on to the next item, which is the revised internal audit plans for 2020-21. So again, over to Vestager.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's me again. I'm nearly done. We're rattling through. So in March, I brought you a strategic and annual plan based on the current risk profile of Broadland District Council and taking the risks into account. And then something quite major happened, which means that that particular plan is no longer fit for purpose. So looking at current best practice, our public sector internal audits standards, and indeed the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, we must ensure that our internal audit plan focuses on the high level risks to the organisation and that we provide assurance to the audit committee on those. Therefore, the internal audit plan needs to be revised. So that's what this report is. Sadly, I've had to rip up the other one and start again and consider what risks we are facing as a council in relation to the operating framework and everything that's happened to date, and indeed the ongoing disruption that we might have as a result of this awful pandemic. So the report itself details the reason why we're doing that, first of all, and then it provides you with a little bit of an indication into terms of some of the risks that we've noticed so far. There are, of course, more that will need to be factored in and considered after during our assurance mapping exercise. The internal audit strategy itself, I've now broken down into 5 themes, sorry. The first being assurance mapping. And this is the one where we will go out to officers and management of key departments to ascertain what has changed, what the control framework looks like at the moment, what the risks look like at the moment. And that will help drive the testing in subsequent audits a bit later on in the year, and we can make sure that we're factoring those into our testing. Key controls and financial controls, we still need to cover those for the annual opinion, and we won't be able to defer those. So there's still very much a key controls theme running through this. Theme 3 relates to response and recovery. So we will be carrying out this particular review across all of our consortium members, and it will cover off how each council has responded, first of all, to the pandemic, but then how they have prepared for the ongoing disruption and what the new world may look like. So we need to put a scope together for that incorporates some of the assurance mapping from theme 1. Partnerships, clearly there's a focus on the risks in relation to contracts that we have and the impact on services. So we'll look at that there. And then theme 5, essential assurance, mops up the areas that we did have included within the previous plan that got approved in March, but actually we still need to carry out for the annual governance statement, or because they've previously been limited and we need to relook at those. So you'll find them in there. Section 3 looks at the strategic internal audit plan, which you can find in Appendix 1. It's a little bit difficult to highlight, but essentially those in last year's or 2021, the previous agreed plan that are yellow, have been deferred into next year pending a risk assessment. And then at Appendix 2, you'll see what we're proposing to do for 2021 now, and it covers that in the revised annual internal audit plan in Section 4. So we have reduced the days ever so slightly, and clearly this represents a caveated approach and the bare minimum that we can do to support the annual opinion. We need to give officers time to respond to the pandemic and recover appropriately without putting too much pressure on them during this period. But we still need to provide you with an annual opinion. So that's what the plan now reflects. We're taking a pragmatic approach to this with a view to ensuring that for the following years we get back to normal coverage. So our recommendation is that we put to you the new revised plan. You see what you think, if you have any comments, any suggested additions, and we have a discussion about that before we go ahead and provide assurance on these high risk areas.
Oops, I didn't realise I had my microphone on still. But thank you for that, Trey. Yes, very. A lot of work has gone into preparing this revised audit plan, so thank you for that. Do any members have any questions before I go into my questions? Nigel, no. I see, Rodney, you've got a question. Just want to check with Karen.
It's a comment rather than a question.
Okay. Any questions from Karen, Sue? No? Okay, so Rodney, go. Oh.
Sorry, I didn't get my hand up quick enough, Chairman. That's not a question, but an observation. I think it's entirely appropriate for us to revisit the plan as a result of what's happened, and I support the pragmatic approach that you've taken. That seems entirely sensible. Thank you.
Absolutely correct. And Rodney, you wanted to make a comment too.
I was just going to say exactly the same as what Karen's just said, in that actually from a management perspective, I think the corporate management team is actually very grateful for the plan being reviewed and actually, again, support the pragmatic approach to actually the audit work this year. So actually, I think from a management side, that is very supported as well. Okay, no, that's excellent. Because and I echo those comments as well, which are quite correct. Just a concern. When I read paragraph 1.5 of the introduction, it indicates that the contractor were furloughed effectively for 3 months.
Yes.
And now we are adjusting our plan in accordance with that. And maybe it's just a concern, but we're expecting the same quality of work from our contractor, and maybe to be provided maybe in fewer days. Does that mean that there's going to be possibly less testing done? Are there fewer areas that are going to be looked at? Are we only going to look at the high risk areas and maybe the medium ones if there is time? And then, of course, lastly, is it not going to have an impact on the well-being of the staff working for the contractor? Because if we put them under pressure, it's going to impact on their work. And then the more pressure leads to staff absence and et cetera, and we, in some way we may not be able to provide or get through all the audit work on our new plan. So has that been taken into consideration when we're talking about the impact on the contractor?
Thank you, Chair. So at the start of the pandemic, when it became quite obvious that there was a lot of disruption, difficult decisions needed to be made, and the contractor was very much, to their credit, up for just continuing as normal. They very much wanted to still provide assurance. They very much wanted to get out there still and continue with the plan. But it became quite obvious quite quickly that the officers were just unable to support that. Some of them had been moved onto the front line, getting information remotely from systems. It became very clear quite quickly that we were going to be unable to just continue as normal. And speaking with a lot of different providers and hearing from the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, there was lots of webinars where people were experiencing a lot of the same. It's not that we weren't a priority anymore, but the whole operational outlook just completely changed for that time period. So the contractor themselves made the decision based on our reflections to furlough their staff at that point. And they said, you know, we really don't have much for them to do. We've got the furlough option, so we're going to take it. We'll be back in July to crack on with the plan. As you can see, there is a reduction in days. So what we've got now is in Q2, it's a very light Q2. We will just be focusing on what has changed and what the risks are. And that will involve questionnaire style assurance maps going out to each of the key areas of the business. Q3 and 4 very much look the same as they have done in previous years across the board. So there is a very slight increase in days, but not by much. So I'm pretty confident that the guys are going to be able to, after quite a long time of sort of sitting there twiddling their thumbs, really, which is very frustrating, as you probably know, for internal auditors, to really get going on the financials in Q3 and then look at some of the recovery stuff and some of the more interesting assurance exercises in Q4, which I'll be back for. So yeah, I think it's very challenging, but I don't think it looks too different in Q3 and 4 to what it has done in previous years. We've just had a really quiet Q1 and Q2, and we need to reflect that in the plan also. But this plan represents the minimum amount of assurance that we need for the annual opinion. So I've made it very clear to management that we can't really have any deferrals into next year. This is what needs to take place. We can't reduce the plan further, or we may be at risk of not being able to provide opinion on the overall framework. But yeah, it's been really challenging, very challenging time for officers and for us as well. And that's really why we need to take this pragmatic approach and reduce it slightly to focus on the key areas.
Yes, thank you for that, Faye. If circumstances deteriorate and there's, like they call a second spike, or staff need to go back onto furlough, I presume that's going to impact again on the work. One of my concerns is that I see working from home as being the new normal, and audit work involves verifying information. And if officers are going to be working from home under the new normal, is that not going to make it rather more difficult for the audit contractor to actually get the work done? Because I would suggest that this new normal is actually creating more of a problem, or more it's more of a challenge for the auditors, to get to that verification work.
It's going to be very different. I mean, luckily our contractors are quite used to working at home already. They already have that sort of process in place. They come on site when they need to. We also have the added advantage of the fact that the core auditors that we use are from TIA, are very experienced, and they understand the client. They know where to get the information from. They know who to speak to. If we were talking about, for instance, a completely different firm that were very green and new to the contract, and they needed a lot more support, I think it would be even more challenging. I think that, there will be some difficulties, but everybody's having these difficulties at the moment in their own way, aren't they? And we just have to make sure that we keep you up to date, and that we try our very best to make sure we get everything done. I think it's quite positive that overall the plan for 1920 was completed in the heat of all of this for Broadland and for a lot of our other clients as well. So that just goes to show how much the contractor cares about getting the work done for us. They are very diligent, but we're talking about individuals that have personal circumstances, and you're quite right. If another peak happens again and we lose one of our core auditors, that's going to cause trouble. we have got resilience in tier, that they've upskilled quite a few other staff members that occasionally work on the contract. So if we do need them at short notice, they can come and join us. So we're doing our very best to minimise the impact, but I think it's going to have to be a close one to watch. You will have the audit contractor, the manager Fiona Doddymead, attending the next Broadland Audit Committee, so you'll be able to ask questions specifically to her about any concerns, and I'm sure she'll be able to reassure you. But yeah, it's going to be a funny one, a very funny year. Chairman, I think you're on mute. I didn't hear any of that. It might just be me.
Unmute. So there we go. Am I unmuted? No, yes, I am. Sorry. Karen, you wanted to say something.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, if I may. It was interesting just hearing that, and I've just got a couple of questions coming out of that, if that's okay. One is just picking up about the minimum amount of audits and the impact that that could have on the assurance for the annual governance statement looking ahead. I noticed, just rereading paragraph 4.4, it talks about a caveated opinion. What do you mean by that? Is that giving us a lesser assurance, or?
I think we need to make it very clear in our annual opinion, the previous report that you've just seen, that normally we would have a set amount of days, and we would be carrying those out across the whole year, across each quarter. And this year it's been very different. And a caveat will just be an explanation of the kind of challenges and changes that we've had to do, and even that we've had to revise the plan in the first place from its approval date in March. So just being very obvious about the fact that this isn't the norm is all I mean there. I'm happy that the amount of days we will provide in this new revised plan will allow us to make the opinion that we need to, and give us enough coverage to say, yes, Broadland has a reasonable risk management and control and governance framework. But we need to watch any deferrals or any further revisions. So that will certainly be something that we could do with your assistance on, just to make sure that we have very good reason for making any further changes in year. It may be that stuff totally changes again, and we need to relook at some bits and pieces, but this is a very fluid plan this year.
Okay, no, thank you. That's answered that question. The other one is just a bit more detailed, and it was looking at the proposed audit. So if I may ask about that.
Sure.
And under the ICT, we've got two new audits, one around remote access and service desk. And I can understand fully why they've been added. I think that's entirely appropriate. I guess my concern there is that they're not programmed until Q4. And I just wondered if there was an opportunity to reflect on that and maybe bring them forward earlier, because if we could be assured that the remote working and the support for people working remotely is not causing us any issues, and there's the confidence there that that's all working well, should there be another spike, we find ourselves perhaps in a better, more assured place.
Yeah, I mean, ideally we would have done this in Q1, and it's about trying to juggle, not putting too much pressure on the team to respond, but also making sure that we're providing assurance. I certainly haven't heard any complaints from officers, and I haven't heard any from members either. I know there's been challenges, but in terms of us being able to work and get our stuff done, this has been good. So far, I think the main risk we are very concerned about is this continuing disruption. I think we're in a really good place at Broadland and South Norfolk, particularly around the investment and the amount of investment that's going into this. We've had a request for economic development to be brought forward, actually, so it may be worth having a discussion with the IT team to see whether they would be able to support us my hunch is they would say, oh, please just come and look at us early Q4 because we're just so snowed under at the minute and we're trying to get everything in place. But I can certainly take that away as a request from the committee and see where we get to with that.
Thank you. It's just really understand if there's some early work, which is perhaps not do all of it, but just gives an early overview. But I totally understand what you're saying about the pressures on that team at the moment.
Yeah, and we will be incorporating it into the assurance mapping stuff in Q2 as well. So we'll have a rough idea at that point that we'll be able to report in Q3 in relation to what the framework looks like and how it's changed. So we'll have a bit of information, but clearly not as much as we would need for a full review. So I'll take that away. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Karen. Just one last question, I think, from myself with regards to Appendix 2, and that was the economic development one, which you did mention, Faye, sorry. I'm curious that Broadland has been allocated 10 days in Q3. It's a joint audit, and yet most of the activity, I assume, is going to be at Broadland because we have got an economic development team that is currently involved in projects. And you're looking at the review will be carried out as a joint piece of work, examining whether a joint methodology has been adopted for economic development at both councils. So I would suggest that the bulk of the work is going to be done for Broadland, but have South Norfolk also in their audit plan been given 10 days as well, or is that is it 10 days for Broadland and 4 days for South Norfolk, for example?
That one's 10 days each, Chairman. So we've got 10 days for South Norfolk and 10 days for Broadland. They are aiming to work side by side on some of the really key high risk projects. So we want to look at the processes that they've put in place and then take a sample of some of the more key projects from each. This could be done at 10 days just at Broadland, but because we've got the same personnel working on the projects, we wanted to make sure that we provide coverage across both, but a full 10 days will be spent on the Broadland side of things, certainly.
Yeah. Okay, because that makes me feel quite confident that, in fact, to complete that audit in 20 days is more than adequate.
It's going to be a nice little audit, that one, isn't it?
Right, so thank you for that, Faye. Anybody else got any questions? Nigel, Sue? No? Fine, super. Right, so we go to the recommendation. The recommendation is that the Audit Committee is requested to note and approve the revised Strategic Internal Audit Plans 2020-21 to 2022-23 and the revised Annual Audit Plan for 2020 to 2021. So by a show of hands, members, if you can just indicate that you approve of that. Thank you very much. So that's unanimous.
Thank you, much appreciated.
Chairman, sorry.
Yes.
Is that subject to that amendment where we're talking if there is any flexibility at looking at the profiling of those audits? How does that?
The progress report that you'll receive in October will show the profiling of them.
Okay.
So it could be discussed at that point. And certainly if it isn't brought forward, then we need to provide you with a good reason as to why it hasn't, I think, if you'd support that.
Yeah, it was just really where we were saying whether there's scope in bringing the ICT ones forward, just in case there is a second spike, because that teams could be particularly busy at that time as well. That was all. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Right, so thank you for that, Karen. We move on to agenda item number 10, which is the risk management policy. So, Faye, again, over to you.
Last one for me, guys, and then I can go and enjoy
then you
my
can
birthday.
Go celebrate your birthday.
Yeah, have a slice of cake. Okay, so as mentioned in previous parts of the agenda, we've put together a new look risk management policy in draft form for the committee to consider and make any amendments if they so wish, to have a discussion about the governance arrangements. This reflects and draws upon all of the best practice where we've seen elsewhere across the consortium and for other councils, but also from things like COSO and the Institute of Risk Management in terms of a process and what looks good for a risk management framework. So it's not too long a policy, so hopefully you've had a chance to read it and digest it. And I think rather than going through it and sort of reading it out, it would be more useful if we start on any questions and a discussion generally about how this might work and whether we need to make any amendments. So over to you.
There we go. Third time lucky, trying to unmute myself. Right. I think that would be a very practical approach. I know that Karen has raised her hand and she would like to make some comments or ask some questions. So I'm going to hand over to Karen.
Sorry, I don't mean to hog the floor, but thank you, Faye, for bringing this forward. I know that's something that we've been asking forward, so thank you for that. I do have a number of questions, and I think it's to help my understanding of the framework.
Sure.
One is, we're calling it a policy, but it feels to me more of a strategy than a policy, because it is really quite how it's structured. To me, it feels more like a strategy. So that was one thing. So would we be better to split that into a strategy and a policy? Because I think some of it in here is a policy and some is less so, was one observation.
Yeah, I'm certainly not precious about, the name. I think, like you say, there's parts of it that could be policy and parts that are very much our strategic approach to risk management. So I think it could be both. Previously, we called it risk management strategy at both South Norfolk and Broadland. So I think that would be one for me to take away, really. I'll discuss with Emma Hodds and just sort of say that that's a recommendation from you guys that it's called that, and I can't see why not, really. I think the policy has enough procedural parts inside it to guide officers, but we need to do a bit more work on a more detailed. I'm planning on doing like a kind of flow chart, really, to support people through the process and lots of training. So I'll take that point away.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess just to add a bit more detail on that, how I'd envisage, and I'm no expert on this, so you can tell me that I'm completely wrong, is that in the strategy, I'd expect to see around accountabilities, responsibility, the framework, how we assess risk, things like that, but actually under the policy, actually linking it to our corporate priorities and putting in there what our risk appetite is. So it's much more focused. So I would have envisaged two separate documents, one being more strategic and generic, and the other being a practical document saying how we're applying that strategy to Broadland.
Yeah.
And linking it with its corporate priorities.
I think it's all been bundled into one in the past, but I think that would help to clarify the two different sections. Yeah, I think it's something to take away and consider and look at that. I don't see why not, unless we have two sections within, like you say, it's clear within the document that there is that two and that separation between strategy and a strategic focus on the framework, and then the policy itself afterwards. Do you think one document would work? I'm just trying to think of keeping it all in one place.
I guess from my experience, you'd normally have two. You'd have the strategy, then you'd have the policy of how you're going to deliver that strategy. And it may be that strategy stays in place longer, but the policy may change underneath.
Yeah.
The delivery might change for a whole host of reasons. So I would have seen it as two separate ones, but that's just
okay.
That's my personal view.
Thank you.
Thank you. The other one, can I carry on? Or until I get turfed off. The other one was around the governance of it. So
Yes.
if I look at the recommendation on page 156, what we're saying there is to consider and approve and recommend for full council. But within the document, and I'm now looking at page 159, paragraph 3.1, that's saying Cabinet has ultimate responsibility for approving the policy. So that may be where it's different, that the framework would be agreed, a recommendation from Audit to Council, but the policy would be a Cabinet one. So that's perhaps where some of that confusion is, because we're trying to do it all in one document.
Yeah.
So that was an observation. So it's understanding, has Cabinet approved this policy if we're now being asked to approve it, or are we having first sight of it, and where we're in that process?
Yeah, so this is the first kind of member area that this policy has been taken to, because you guys will drive forward what looks good in terms of a risk management framework, and then be expected to provide full council with assurance that you're happy with that framework. Cabinet will see the papers and the documentation around strategic risks, but quite rightly, as you say, Karen, the policy and the strategy for risk management at Broadland District Council is a full council matter. If not, we wouldn't be asking for your endorsement for the approval. So I think that perhaps is, that it's a little confused and needs some thought.
Thank you, Faye. The other is, what did I say? I'm trying to remember what my other things. I've got some scribbles on my papers, so I'm just trying to. I think the other, and it's a suggestion for improving it. So there's a lot of really good information in there, but in terms of the structure, if you're looking at risk ownership, for an example, under section 8, you've got, we can see there how risks for the strategic risk register are assigned there, but those for the lower risk registers, the directorate and the project ones, are not listed there, but they're elsewhere in the document. So it's if I was picking this up and saying who's responsible for where does the risk ownership lie, at the minute I would look in the contents and go to section 8, but I'm only finding part of the answer there, and the other half is in section 4.3.
Okay.
So it's just a suggestion, if we could, if it would help with the readability of it, I think, if things were grouped under that heading, as a suggestion is one of them. And
okay.
I think my last one, I might come back in a minute, but I feel I'm hogging the floor. The other one is under risk appetite, under 11.4. And I know when we discussed this at an earlier audit committee earlier this year, I think I asked a question along the lines of, or we were talking about the risk register, and it was recognised, I think it was Director of Resources, saying that the risk appetite might be different between Broadland and South Norfolk, because obviously they're two sovereign councils. And there is a risk appetite stated in 11.4, which is a joint one. And I'm just wondering if we can reflect on that, and if Cabinet are saying what the risk appetite is, at what point do they tell us what that is, and how does that, it's a processing again, how does that find its way into this paragraph?
Yeah, I think the view very much at the time was to incorporate one that covered both, because we have one team and we would be likely wanting to exploit the same sort of opportunities, and we are very similar in our values. I don't know, I don't think that's changed, but certainly it's worth having a discussion about whether we do need two distinct statements. At the moment, I haven't heard that there needs to be, and that's why there's just one in the policy, but that may be a discussion at the time of approving for full council, or like you say, a discussion for Cabinet. That's not for us to say. That's very much a discussion that needs to be had between the two councils, because that will ultimately determine how much risk that they're willing to take, and whether they do want to be on different pages or whether they do want to be on the same one. So yeah, I think when the policy was written, it was very much felt that it should be the same statement. So if that outlook has changed, we'll need to reconsider that statement.
Thank you. I guess the only reason I say that, because if we're being asked as an audit committee to approve this to council, and if Cabinet hasn't seen this and have a policy or have a different view, it just feels like we're being a bit premature taking that to council as we believe that's the risk appetite.
Yeah.
That was all I was thinking. I don't feel that I'd feel comfortable approving this to go to council without having that conversation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. We have Emma joined the meeting. Hello, Emma. Nice to see you.
Hi, Chair.
Please
Just thought it might help me
make
on
a
that
point.
Yeah, I thought it might help me coming in on that point. I've been listening in the background, scurrying some notes, and listening to the conversation between Cabinet versus Council decision. And Karen raises some very valid points there. I think the thing with the Audit Committee, you can only recommend to Council in terms of your terms of reference. So that's why Faye's got the recommendation in that she's got. Listening to the points that Karen has made, and yes, policy does need to go to Cabinet. So we're going to need to look to kind of almost twin track this through, but I think Faye's right, it needs to come to you as a committee first, because you really have kind of grabbed this for us and really helped us to get this to where we need to get it to. So we really want to make sure that we're capturing everything that kind of you've said as a committee. I know I've kind of been out of the loop, but Faye's kept me up to date with the conversations that you've had. So that's why we've kind of got that, what almost appears to be that conflict there, Karen. So we can address that through making sure that before it goes on to council from Audit Committee, because obviously we will look for you to endorse this and own this, we can make sure that we take that through the cabinet route to get their endorsement to that as a policy as well.
Just on that point, I would suggest that there obviously does need to be some more work done on this. Is it possible for us to, and this I need to ask Emma, is it possible for us to convene an extra meeting so that we can just specifically look at this particular document in its revised format, and then make a recommendation fairly soon to council?
Yeah, I mean, you can. I would suggest probably do that as an informal meeting, because I think that would be probably be the best route. I would suggest doing that before Faye goes on maternity leave, as she's got all the knowledge in her head. But I think that's not a bad idea if we can take away any other comments that committee's got, have an informal meeting, which are easier to kind of get together and put in, and we can have that discussion, and then that can inform how that then goes on to cabinet and subsequently council.
As I mentioned a little earlier on as well, Chair, the transformation team will be ultimately responsible for providing the reports to you. That won't be internal audit that presents the strategic risk register with the accompanying report. We're just trying to get this off the ground and assisting officers with that. They've raised the point that they would need to bring it to, because of the terms of reference, overview and scrutiny and cabinet and audit committee, and what order would that go in? And that feels like quite a lot of duplication. So that may be worth having a conversation with cabinet as well, and something that we may need to iron out. Is that going to stop as this policy comes into place, that it goes to overview and scrutiny, and actually you guys are just now responsible for the risk register and looking at that, and that's enough for full council? Or do we still need that step in there? I think that needs to be considered.
I definitely agree with you, Faye. We do need to have some kind of discussion about that. So going forward, I would suggest that with regards to the recommendation is that we have considered it, but we would like to defer it for a further meeting.
We're not quite ready yet.
Yeah. Okay, so is everybody happy with that? Karen, did you want to say something before, or were you just saying?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a suggestion. Would a pragmatic approach, if we did, just going back to my first point, if we split it into two documents, one is a strategy and one is a policy, the policy bit could go through the cabinet process through overview and scrutiny. And so if we strip the policy elements out of this document, it would just become a strategic document that we could then recommend to council as part of looking at it in this separate meeting. It would then resolve some of the issues that we've highlighted. I don't know if that makes sense.
Shall I come in on this point? I'm sensing silence in the room. I'll come in on this point. I only heard kind of half of the conversation start with Karen, but I'll go back on YouTube, the joys of YouTube, and have a look at it. So I think that is definitely a way forward, and that could help to unpick it. What I'm just conscious of is, because this is kind of quite new, we need to make sure that the two documents do then stand alone. Because if we're going to take one route and one another route, I wouldn't then want to complicate things. I would want to make sure that everyone sees the complete picture. So I think probably if me and Faye just take away that as a potential option and work that through and see how that pans out, I think would probably be the best, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely perfect. The key for us as committee members is that we want to get this thing right. Yeah. And so that is the route I think we will take.
Yeah.
So anybody who've got any further comments to make on the risk management policy? Sue, you wanted to raise something?
Well, it is just related to this business as well, I'm afraid. All I'm concerned about is that if we end up with this policy and a strategy, you know, they do need to be aligned, don't they? I wouldn't want to see them take two separate paths and then become, in some respects, slightly distant from each other. And that would be my concern if we're going to look at it in that way. I just think that needs to be, we need to be careful about that.
Yeah, and I'm quite sure that from what Emma was saying, that they will be aligned very, very closely. So thank you for that, Sue. Anybody else got any comments before we move on to the next agenda item? No. Which is the annual governance statement. And the report author is present. Is that a report that you're going to present, Emma, or is that going to be done by Rodney or Faye?
That will be me, Chairman.
Oh, thank you. Emma,
I'll have a rest
ahead.
now, Chair. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Chairman. So in front of you is the annual governance statement that you as a committee you're used to receiving. Some things that I just wanted to kind of pull out to the committee. One of the new things that we did on the back of last year's annual governance statement was make sure that accountability and responsibility for this was much wider across the senior management team. So what we've introduced is what we're calling assurance statements. So each assistant director has a spreadsheet. I'm not going to say it's anything grander than that, but it is a spreadsheet that looks at all the key areas that they're responsible for as an assistant director, and they have to give assurance that they've got the right controls in place, or they haven't, or that they're partly in place. What that then provides my team with is a picture of the whole governance framework across the council, and it indicates where we've got potential areas where there's a common theme of issues across the board, and where we get those common themes of issue is where then this would then feed into the annual governance statement. So for me, I think that's been a really good improvement this year, because historically it was quite an isolated annual governance statement and didn't have that wider feed into. So I think that's an improvement we've been able to make this year. It obviously also feeds in Faye's annual report and her head of internal audit opinion in there as well. So taking you through, I won't take you through the whole document, but I'm happy to, if you would like me to, Chair, or would you like me to pull out some key points?
That's fine. You can, I think, take out the key point. Just go through the key points to the report. That'll be great. And then we can ask questions after that. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So probably the key points to pull out, not wanting to be negative, but it is probably a look back on last year's issues and the issues that have been raised this year. So I'm just finding the page where that starts, bear with me. So page 184 of your agenda. We look back there on the issues that were raised last year. at the time we had the kind of the start of the closer relationships with South Norfolk Council and the development of the One Team. That obviously does continue into this year and going forward as well. I've talked there about the broader approach to the annual governance statement, which I've just outlined how we did that. And we also raised last year the approach to risk management at the council, which obviously as a committee you've really championed for us this year, which I know Faye is extremely grateful for. So looking at the assurance statements for 1920, as I said, assistant directors have completed those and each relevant director has signed that off for their area. And we ask specific questions, as I've said, around the business plan, human resources, finance, risks and controls, etc. So again, we've looked at kind of the key themes that have come out of that. Again, there is the, as with any new collaboration, there is the settling in of the governance arrangements and the process, procedures and policies across the two councils that continue to be worked on. There was interestingly a lot of business continuity discussions prior to COVID. We were working through all of those and updating those. COVID has been a really massive learning experience for us. So the team are working with ADs to kind of in the moment reflect on what those need to look like, and it's been interesting everything that you plan for and actually how you react. So this has been an opportunity, I guess, to come out of COVID to actually make those really live and actually really reflective of what it is that we need. In a positive light, there was nothing that's really significant that has caused me concern, but those two areas I think is something that we just need to continue working on. The external auditors rightfully requested that I add a statement in here around how we responded to COVID. Obviously COVID hit towards the end of the financial year, so it was only partial, but it was right and proper to make sure that we reflected any changes that we had to make as a result of COVID. So there in that section, I've pulled out some of the key things that changed, outlining the controls. The main one was 90% of the workforce working from home. It's a massive change for the organisation. However, there's what's called two-factor authentication and secure login. And once staff are logged in, they still have the same level of access and controls that they would as if they're working in the office. Obviously, you're all aware of the democratic decision process. We had to make changes to the constitution, allowing us to have meetings as such that we're having now. And then there's some financial controls that Rodney and his team amended slightly in light of COVID to make sure that we could continue to operate in a secure environment. And then again, kind of a positive coming out of COVID has been, again, the review of processes and practices, where we can be more efficient, where we can be more effective in our working. It's really kind of helped teams to take the opportunity to step back and look at their ways of working. I've referred to the Head of Internal Audit opinion, which I believe Faye presented earlier in the agenda. So, Chair, they're the main points that I wanted to bring out. And as always, I'm happy to take any questions.
Right. Thank you, Emma. As always, and as expected, a very high quality of work being done in putting together this annual governance statement. So thank you for that, Emma. Do any members have any questions on the annual governance statement? Nigel, Karen, or Sue? No, nobody. Oh, Karen, you have a question. Yes, please go ahead.
I was holding back just in case. Yes, thank you very much, Emma, for the report. It's a very thorough report, so thank you. I just had a couple of observations, and I indicated earlier in the meeting, but I've held it to this point because your report was also in our draft statement of accounts. So I think the two observations are one, where we talk about the annual the accounts and audit regulations, or get my words out, accounts and audit, regulations 2015. Do we not also need to refer to the accounts and audit, the coronavirus amendment, the statutory instrument, because that's permitted us to delay the presentation of the accounts or the publishing of the accounts?
Yeah, we probably should actually. To be fair, I can add that in. Yeah, valid point, Karen. Yep.
Okay. And that was one thing. The other thing, this is a draft annual governance statement at the moment, isn't it? So we're approving a draft annual governance statement, and then we'll receive, I think that's what Rodney was saying earlier, we'll receive a final, once the accounts are finalised, we'll then have a final annual governance statement. Is that how it works?
You can do one of two things, and councils tend to do this differently across the board. So I think what we've done in the past, if you've received it as a draft and you've been happy to endorse it as the final at that point in time, you would obviously receive it back with the final statement of accounts, but you'd prior signed it off. Or you say that you want it back again. It tends to be depending on how many changes you've wanted to make to the annual governance statement. So if I was to put in front of you a document that you felt had missed a whole load of control issues or stuff that you've seen as a committee, rightfully so, you would send me on my merry way to make those changes and get that into a much better document for you. And then we would bring that back at the final accounts. So it very much depends on how many changes you want to see to that document, and it's kind of within your gift as an audit committee to determine which way you'd like to go with that.
Thank you, Emma. I guess my only observation is that the external audit is one of our sources of assurance, and if we haven't yet had the external audit on the accounts, we don't quite know. We hope it's all going to go swimmingly well, but until we've had it, that's one of the things that I guess is a caveat for me, that we haven't had all of our assurances, because normally we'd do this all at the same time, but we're in a very unusual time at the moment. And would it be pragmatic to actually just approve it as a draft? I guess my suggestion is to approve it as a draft at this stage, knowing that we're not quite through the process yet, and that then gives us an opportunity when we are, that we then approve a final. But that's just my personal view as a suggestion.
Yep, I'm happy to go with whichever way the committee feels they want to go in. Either way is fine, Karen.
Yeah, no, I quite agree with that that comment. And as I say earlier in the meeting, we want to get this document right, and so because it is not absolutely final, it would be. I would suggest that we could endorse the document, but when it comes to the actual approval of it, we can do that when we do we see the final version of the accounts and the remarks or comments of the external auditor, which I think is as Karen says, quite crucial. Any further comments, Karen?
Yeah. Thank you as the first comment, and then the final one was just under the risk management section. I know we've just talked about that, but earlier in the meeting we talked about the need for risk management training for members as well. And in that section, it just talks about training for staff. If we are going to provide it for members, which I think would be a really valuable thing, especially as Councillor Holland said, for the audit committee initially. If we're going to do it, that would be a good positive thing to say in there as well, that to reinforce that.
Yeah, it's absolutely fine. The intention was always to provide you with training, so I can make that clear in there. Karen, what page is that on? Have you got that in front of you?
Page 186.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank
Brilliant.
you very much.
Yep.
No more comments for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Karen. I just wanted to. I do get pedantic. But as at the top of page 181, where we talk about development needs of councillors and officers, just curious, right at the top, the sentence reads, ensure members can take on all aspects of their role confidentially and legally. Is that confidentially or is that confidently?
I could say, but I obviously mean both, but I think what I obviously mean is confidently, not confidentially. So we'll amend that.
Okay, because again, being a little bit pedantic, also at the top of page 184, we talk about Broadland Growth Limited as a joint venture company owned with NPS Property Consultants Limited. I think there's a slight duplication of limited there.
Yep, noted, Chair.
Yeah, I just wondered on page 178, It talks about the council has made ongoing savings, etc., has sought to grow income levels through a number of commercial initiatives. What can you just give us a quick indication of some of those commercial initiatives that we are working together with South Norfolk on?
I think probably part of what, let me just read this. So, hang on, sorry. I'm just getting the right paragraph. So that's probably what that's referring to is more around the Broadland growth side of things. So it's not the kind of that joint commercial at this point in time. It's the work that we've done on Broadland growth. So I can make that specific, Chairman, if you'd like, or I can, and also I'll just have a chat with Debbie Lorimer around that, and if there's anything else, because obviously she's led on the commercial strategy, and if there's anything else specifically she wants to add in there, I can do that as well. So you've got that for the final version.
Yes, that'll be absolutely perfect. Thank you, Emma. Right. Anybody else got any comments that they'd like to make on the annual governance statement? So we are happy to endorse, would that be a correct word, Emma? That we could endorse this document as is,
yeah.
And then we look forward to approving it at a future meeting once we get the final version. Super, thanks, Emma. Right, now we move on to the next item, which is the, let me just get the proper words, is the audit scale fee 2020-21. And we are, I presume, there's no covering report, it's just a letter that has been attached. Is there anything that you would like to say about this, Rodney? Over to you.
I think I should just sort of point out a couple of bits in this. So this is slightly different this year. Normally it would be EY who write us a letter saying what the proposed scale fee is for the audit. This year it's PSAA who is writing ourselves. And very much the scale fee that has been proposed is on page 189 in the table, which is essentially saying the scale fee for 2021 audit will be £32,000, which is the same as the current scale fee. However, the key point here is actually that paragraph right at the top of the page where PSAA are clearly saying that they do not expect the final audit fee to remain at that level. So although that is the scale fee, the actual fee is likely to be significantly higher. And in fact, for 1920, EY have written to ourselves and asked for a 57% increase on the scale fee for 1920. So we are looking at potentially actual audit costs of £50,000 as opposed to £30,000. So that is a significant increase. There are good reasons for this in that they have been under an awful lot more pressure to make sure they follow with stricter accounting guidance. But I didn't want you to be misled in thinking that the audit fee is likely to remain at that level. We are obviously in discussion with EY and PSAA about these increases because actually it is very difficult for us to be in this position because actually we appointed PSAA to actually do the negotiation with the contractors to appoint the auditors and the audit fee. And now we're in the position where actually EY are coming to ourselves, as all auditors are across the country, and saying this scale fee is not significant, it's not high enough. But we're also saying, yes, but you've got to contract with ourselves, and this was the level it should be. So at the moment, we are in those discussions about what that final scale fee would be. But I think just to put in context as well, the scale fees have gone down significantly from the audit commission days. So back in 2012-13, the audit fee for Broadland was £54,000. So actually we have been seeing a significant reduction in the previous years. It's just more likely that audit fee is going to be increasing back to historical levels in due course. Pause for questions.
No, that's excellent, thank you. So it's not final that it's going to be in the £50,000 mark, but significantly for me, I recall having attended a meeting at EY offices in Cambridge, that it's dependent on the work that is produced, whether they have to extend the scope of their audit. And if things remain the same and they do not have to extend, then the additional charges that they were talking about would not be imposed. Is that correct, Rodney?
The increase in the audit fee is actually broken down into 3 elements. One is saying about an increase in audit risk, and this is a national issue, and they're talking about nearly £10,000 for that. They're saying an increase in the regularity requirements, as in the requirements to actually be doing more detailed testing on some of the elements. So again, that's another increase of perhaps £9,000. And the one that we can control is about client readiness and the support, and that's suggesting an increase of under £1,000 for that. So what we can control is actually under £1,000 of the £20,000 potential increase.
Right. So there's effectively there's nothing we can do. We can just note the contents of the letter and await the outcome of the audit work that is done.
Indeed, and the Section 151 officers across Norfolk have written jointly to PSAA expressing our disquiet at the level of increase in audit fees, and we're awaiting their response.
Right, so you'll bring back to us at a future meeting what we are likely to expect as far as audit fee for the next year is going
Correct.
to be. Is it going to impact in any way on our current audit fee?
Well, it's the audit fee for the 1921 that we're currently under discussion on. So it's the one they're currently doing at the moment.
Okay, no, that's fine. So right, all we need to do as a committee is just to note the contents of the letter.
That's correct.
Thank you, Rodney. Right, so then we move on to, sorry, does anybody else want to comment in any way on that letter? Sue, no. Nigel, no. Karen, no. Right. Then last item, of course, is our work program. And is there anything that we need to consider? I think, Faye, before you run away and enjoy your birthday, is there anything that we need to amend?
I guess you should be aware that I'm with child currently, and it's due to arrive late August. So not only is it my birthday, but I'm very heavily pregnant right now.
Wonderful.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of arrangements while I'm off, we were hoping that it would be acceptable to send Fiona, as I mentioned earlier, our audit director. She'll have detailed knowledge on the audits that have been carried out. And then I fully plan to be back and available for our following meeting in March. So just covering for me, holding the fort until I can get back. And you may just have to be a little gentle with her in terms of the layout, but she'll be fully versed on how to present the reports and things. So that's all I needed to say.
Well, thank you for that, and I can see the smiles and absolute joy that you are with child.
Yeah, it probably won't be joy when it happens. I've already got one, so I think I'm in for a bit of a shock. But
well,
you know,
congratulations.
Thank you.
Right. Anybody else got any comments on the work program? Emma, you.
Yep, Chairman, we probably just should add in the final annual governance statement for the 22nd of October.
Absolutely. Yes, that's right. So that's going in there. We don't need to put in or pencil in a informal meeting, because that's not. But because that is an issue that we want to look at, is to sort out the risk management strategy and policy. We don't need to pencil that into our work program, although it is something that we as a committee need to get right.
Yeah, Chair, what I'll probably ask is for James to liaise with yourself and Faye over an option of a couple of dates, maybe to send round to the committee for that informal meeting.
No, that would be excellent. Other than that, is there anything else that we need to consider for our work program? I don't see anybody shaking. Oh, I see shaking of heads. So, okay, thank you. Oh, Nigel, you wanted to raise something.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just looking at the work program, just slightly confused. Is it my stupidity? But we've got 11th of March 2020 to review strategic and annual internal audit, etc. I mean, we're now in July, so why have we got 11th of March?
We're going to go back in time and hope 2020 is better second time round.
Time travelling.
Yeah.
You're the new Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I'll ensure that's updated.
Is that supposed to be 21, I presume, is it?
It's 21.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
lovely. Thank you.
Right. Okay, one last thing, and I think we did talk about it with Rodney earlier in the meeting, and that was the updating of the fraud, corruption, etc. policies and that sort of thing. Is that something we can bring possibly to the March 2021 meeting, Rodney? Would you have been, with the new person in post, have been able to sort out some kind of a review of our policies?
Ideally, I'd like them to put on the list with a to be confirmed date at the moment, and let me come back in the next meeting with that final date. But I think it'd be a good idea to put them on as in they're on our future work programme. I'm not certain what date it will be at the moment.
Okay, no, that sounds absolutely fine. So thank you for that, Rodney. Right, anybody else got anything that they would like to raise, comment? Other than that, I will say enjoy the rest of your day. Stay well, keep safe, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Enjoy your birthday, Faye.